Hello again, everybody, and welcome inside the Howitzer and Buzzsaw Show. I am George the Howitzer Gerbo.
And I am Mike the Buzzsawsty.
Sports Talk back with you at a chaotic time of the year here. Madness has truly enveloped us on the court and off the court. NCAA tournament time, men's and women's. We got a lot of stuff to talk about here on this edition of the HPS.
Yeah.
And it all surrounds the madness. Mike's been swept up in the madness. I have also been swept up and soon will be swept up in the madness. A lot of things going on, a lot of stuff to discuss. It's been wild. It's been wild, Mike.
Yeah. George just gets to mix in a vacation while I run around and chase a toddler. It's a little different lifestyles that we're leading right now. But yes, it's been madness. It's been asinine madness. It's maybe been different madness because usually in March, there's coaching searches and there's moving and shaking coaching wise. And even now in the transfer portal era with, by the way, the transfer portal window's open. We're not done with the NCAA tournament, but it's open just like it opened before bowl season in football. But this madness is not so much in big upsets in the NCAA tournament, which some people are complaining about. Not enough of them, maybe, for them, even though the ratings suggest you don't care and are still watching. But the madness is almost more plentiful on what's going on off the court, the coaching carousel, the fact, again, that the portal window is open, and I believe there were 500 players in the first hour. Not obviously all of them are stars, but it's just wild. It's madness, and it's March on the Howitzer and Buzzsaw Show.
700, I think, on day one in total after the day ended. So
yeah,
a lot to go on. Shout out to Steamboat Springs. Got to spend some time with family. Normally would be loath to do that in the middle of the season, but the family took priority there, so it was nice to get it up. And keep up on everything else and all the other craziness is going on. So, a reminder: find us wherever you get your podcasts at Gerbo3 for myself, at Howitzer Buzz. I'm mixing the reads up. You know how it goes. If you can't find us, it's your own fault because we're everywhere on Spotify, on Google, on Apple, on TuneIn. Search Howitzer Buzzsaw. Shout out as always to Kellen B. Conley and the Hyphen Podcast Network, Hyphen Podcast Group, which we're part of. That is at Hyphen Podcast Group on socials, and B. Hyphen's work can be found at hyphenuniverse.com.
Yeah, and the lead-in of the show is Kellen's old school theme champion, and we're going to crown a champion eventually here, get through March and then into early April. And you can find us everywhere you get your podcasts and on social media at Gerbo3, at Mike Osti 11, at House of Buzzsaw for the show handle for the quick read there. And then also, of course, if you are not able to find us, you are just simply not trying hard enough. And when the sports world gets asinine and the madness turns it up a notch to another level, I feel like the Howitzer and Buzzsaw show is needed. It's been about a month break from this show while everything else has been going on. I feel like this show is needed when it gets, peak madness.
We are here for you, the sports consumer.
John Cena even turned heel, by the way. We're not going to talk about it here, but in the midst of the madness, we finally got a John Cena heel turn. And I will just add for my wrestling commentary, George, then maybe we'll have a show towards WrestleMania season where we talk more. I love the fact that everyone's been waiting for the heel turn. People were talking about, okay, now what's the new music going to be? What's it going to look like? You can't have the jean shorts anymore. How's it going to sound? All of that. And he comes out there and says, you don't get new theme music. You don't get a new look. I'm still going to rock the jean shorts and hat. And then tells the fans they suck. That was perfect. He's not giving them what they want, even though everyone's been wanting all of that for our whole lives, it feels like. So we finally got the John Cena heel turn in the midst of this madness. We'll see where that goes. But so far, I think that's working out and being handled perfectly.
Seth Rollins on Good Morning Football last couple of days talking up his match with CM Punk and Roman Reigns at WrestleMania. So WrestleMania season upon us. Masters, golf, a whole bunch of stuff going on. F1 just started. Shout out to those guys.
Yeah.
But our focus here.
No Tiger Woods on the golf course, but he is dating a Trump. So
TGL wrapped up. I was watching the TGL stuff. I liked it. I found it entertaining during the early weeks in the winter here when nothing's going on. So that's neither
I
here
found
nor
it entertaining when we watched, and then maybe the next week. But as I told you, even Serbian Christmas, if it dragged on too long, people would lose interest. It dragged on too long. It dragged on too long.
they tried to tweak some.
Just too
It'll be
much.
interesting to see. They tweaked some things mid-season to try to make it more competitive, and I think it did. But yeah, they got some things they can fix and work on
But yeah,
for the next season. So shout out TGL. Okay, March Madness. If I sound exhausted and tired, it's because I am. I need to get off the damn Bird app. It's all it's just a constant source of information, trying to understand and synthesize things. We'll get to the craziness here in a minute. Let's start with the actual basketball, because I do feel in my soul that like that needs to be the most important part of what we've got going on here. Sweet 16, Elite 8 rounds. The road to the Final Four begins. 4 sites across the country: San Francisco, Indianapolis, Atlanta, Newark. And we've got an upper echelon group of teams, Mike. Lowest seed in the remaining in the tournament, number 10 Arkansas. Bit of a
John
false
Calipari,
positive,
right?
because they're led by John Calipari, who had a number 3 seed Kentucky team last year that you and I watched in Pittsburgh.
And they lost.
Get upset by now infamous Jack Golke and his 3-point shooting, and Oakland. And mere days after that, Calipari, self-pressure, just left Kentucky. Didn't want to deal with that, the level of pressure and commitment there. So he stays in conference and goes to Arkansas, and has done an impressive job leading this Arkansas team that lost 5 straight games to start the season, and many people wrote off as being, like, oh, this is what a disaster this is for him, and a sad way for his career to end, according to some.
Yeah. I mean, he was getting a nice chunk of change regardless, and that's part of how you can do this that quick. Tyson Chicken's helping us a little bit.
Yeah, no, of course, but the results early in the season do not indicate as such. And Arkansas, give credit to Arkansas, they turned it around. 10 seed, he wins the Italian battle against Rick Pitino and St. John's. St. John's, the Big East champion, a 2 seed this year. All the Big East teams knocked out. Big East was a strong league this year. All their teams knocked out before the round of 16. And so Calipari and Arkansas as a 10 seed are the lowest in the bracket. And then above them, it's 6 and higher. Everybody is a 6 seed or higher. BYU was a good team in the Big 12 all season that you saw a lot as West Virginia played them. They advanced.
I could argue the most underrated team, not seed wise, but just in general. People are all surprised. Not at all. They're one of the best offensive teams in the whole country. I wouldn't be shocked they keep on winning. So that BYU's happening.
They advanced 2-point victory upset over Wisconsin, who played in the Big Ten championship game and had gotten on even though they had a bad end of their regular season, and then got on a roll in the Big Ten tournament and still ended up losing in the round of 32. Iowa State, another team that was kind of really hot early in the season and then kind of cooled off a little bit. A team that West Virginia had beat in the middle.
It's a little different, than BYU. They kind of putter away. Yeah,
they get by. Ole Miss trounces them. And so Ole Miss still hanging in there, one of the SEC representatives. And then we've got, our perennial Michigans, our Dukes, our Arizonas, Auburn, Florida, still SEC heavy, Houston, Purdue, Maryland, Texas Tech, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Kentucky for your Sweet 16 teams. And I'll start here. And I can't remember. I don't think I've heard your thought on this yet, but everybody kind of taken the, oh, woe is us. NIL's ruined. No mid-major team advancing, even though we got McNeese State, advancing in the first round over Clemson, 12 seed. And I contend that it's okay to have a year where these are the best teams and the best teams advanced. We got a few years ago a Final Four that was Connecticut, Miami, Florida Atlantic, and San Jose State. Like that was incredible for how kind of random and unexpected that was. And Dusty May, who was FAU's
coach, obviously Connecticut became a dynasty, but outside of that, it was a lot of surprise. And you also, I mean, ratings again bear out that you want to have one Cinderella, but when you have too many, that doesn't help ratings
Yeah.
wise. TV. That was not a better ratings wise
No.
Final Four.
So
There was
one
Steelers
Final
winning
Four where we've got a lot of highly seeded teams in the round of 16 and presumably advancing to the Elite Eight and Final Four is not bad for the sport. It doesn't ruin the sport. There will be more. We've not ended. I believe we've not ended Cinderellas just because we live in a day and age of NIL and conference realignment and all this stuff going on. And I think the games are going to bear that out, because it's not, Mike, this one, we've had the years where we had an undefeated Kentucky team that was trying to do what Indiana did in the 70s and go undefeated, and they ended up losing. We've had a highly rated Carolina and a Duke team advancing, and there's no, in my opinion, there's no one overall dominant team. A lot of people will pick Duke. Auburn is just as good. Florida
or
is
Houston. A lot of people pick Houston as well.
Houston. Yeah, I think Kelvin Sampson does not get enough credit for what he's done there. It's a team that's been in the Final Four in the last couple of seasons. The Gators are back for the first time since back for the first time since the Billy Donovan era, with tremendous scoring that they're able to do. It's they're the third best rebounding team in the nation. A lot of different things that are headlining these teams. Michigan State, we didn't even mention January, February Izzo, Tom Izzo, back with one of his stronger teams that won the Big Ten this season with only 3 league losses, and a surprise for a lot of people. So I kind of like it that we've got all of these higher seeds, because in my opinion, some of the love and strength is spread around. There's not just one dominant team and, oh, here's the 2 and the 3 seeds, like there is sometimes in women's basketball, where you've got, the top 3 or 4 seeds, but we really know only the top 4 or 5 teams are the ones that are contenders. I think the interesting thing, and this was kind of how the season was, Mike, is we had teams, leapfrogging each other in the rankings, in the net, in the AP top 25 into those top slots. And it just kind of illustrated that this was going to be a season where there's no real dominant force in college basketball. And I think we get that here, even though all of your seed lines are 10 and higher. I think that just shows how good these teams that have made it this far are compared to the rest of the field. It's not necessarily an indictment on how bad the mid-majors were, or the mid-majors can't compete. They'll be able to compete in the future, in my opinion. But these teams right now have so much wealth spread around them that it's nice to see all of them rise to the top and kind of validate their regular season.
Well, it's also that even though the chalk is advancing and the higher seeds are advancing, if you look at the preseason polls and the preseason projections, Michigan State, for example, was not supposed to do this with Izzo. Bruce Pearl with Auburn, even though Auburn's a power, this is not football. They're not a power in basketball. Charles Barkley is probably the best basketball player ever to come out of there. And obviously that was way back in the early 80s, and they didn't even go far. And they've had different seasons, but not like this, where they're really predicted to do it. So you as you have the season unfold, then you have these stories come alive. The Auburn season come alive, where they're really perennially a number 1 team most of the season. But before the year, people were talking more about Duke and other programs. And then Calipari struggling early on, even though that was a surprise, because Calipari never struggles early on. You wouldn't figure he'd struggle like that. He did struggle early on, had to endure the hiccups there. Even though he didn't end up advancing to the Sweet 16, Rick Pitino resurrecting his career. He did it at Iona, but to do it at St. John's, a basketball hotbed. Unlike Bob Huggins, he got his second chance after scandal, and he's getting it done again. And you could make an argument he actually is the greatest coach of all time, despite only the 2 national titles with 1 sanctioned, because everywhere he goes, it's just tournament success and wins and instant success. And there was a reality show on Vice that I don't know who actually watched, that I checked in on time to time on it, wins the Big East. So you have teams that going into the year were not predicted to do as much as they eventually did. Maryland, even several years in with Kevin Willard, there used to be a basketball hotbed, but it's been a while. It's been a decade since they've been this far. This ends up being a year where they finally get it done and at least get a banner for Sweet 16. And yet Florida being back, other programs like that, North Carolina having a down year, even though they do squeeze in controversially. And I still contend West Virginia should have made the tournament, but they get in, then they win a game, and then they fall off. But even other teams that got in, or teams that now advance, in a way, even though they're not mid majors or Cinderellas, they either were surprising, good or bad, and there were a lot of storylines about this year. So I think this season was full of storylines, even if you didn't get the major Cinderella story of the San Diego State, of the FAU, of the VCUs, and you even get Connecticut coming off back-to-back championships, trying to do a three-peat, and Hurley saying no to the Lakers to do the three-peat. They have an up and down year. They're not as good as they normally have been, and they crawl in the tournament, and then they have a kind of a rough road. They win a game, then they lose. He obviously goes off the court saying they got screwed, calls out to Baylor, you're going to get screwed too. He obviously has to get his name out there even when they lose. Gonzaga has been a perennial tournament top seed for 20 plus years with Mark Few. This year, they were actually a bubble team as recent as February. So they didn't have it locked up back then. And they end up getting in, but not going as far as they normally would like. So those storylines exist too, even on the negative end of it. And as much as West Virginia fans obviously don't want to hear this, because again, despite DeVries leaving, I think they deserve to get in. I think the reasoning of a star player not being available is the dumbest reasoning I've ever heard, because you're literally saying that they played an exhibition season from February on, which I know he was hurt and was out for the year prior to that by covering the program. But even if you want to say that's not true and you go off the announcement, the program released it in February and they kept on playing and they won 2 of the 3 top 10 wins of the year without him, including at Kansas and Gonzaga, etc. So they should have been in, but even the controversial aspect of them getting snubbed, and a historic program getting snubbed, and a blue blood getting over them who didn't deserve it, that got on national shows. That got Stephen A. Smith involved talking to View. That actually was in a way good for the engagement of the tournament to get into March. They want controversy in that respect.
Mm-hmm.
So the numbers were there on social engagement because of the controversy, and you get in the tournament, you don't have a Cinderella story really, but you still have a lot of storylines with a lot of the teams that are advancing and what's going on. Again, even teams that are losing. And that matriculates and allows ratings to exist. So the numbers on social media, on national shows, with the talking heads, and even the just pure ratings of watching these games bear out that the tournament's not hurting itself.
Mm-hmm.
And even without that major Cinderella story, it'll be fine. And what I want to also add for anybody who thinks NIL is going to not allow a Cinderella story again, in college football, different sports obviously have been structured differently, but just off the recent football example of a expanded playoff going to the 12 team, we just had 1 year of it. And they may change the seeding and go to a past show. I think they should. But we've seen non-blue bloods. We've seen group of 5, so the equivalent of a mid-major in basketball, have success, get in the college football playoff, and sometimes even make some noise. Boise State was able to get in again. They did it 20 years ago as a surprise. They're doing it again even in this era. It's a totally different era than it was 20 years ago when they were in that BCS bowl game against Oklahoma. They're still alive now. Yes, you get the Ohio State winning it all, and Oregon, maybe they could claim, but they're not, and they got in and were a top team, and Penn State gets in, and you have those type of blue blood teams, but you also had Indiana, who had 3 bowl wins in 100+ years, and in year 1 of the playoff, and yeah, their schedule was easy, but with 1 year in Kurt Signetti and that staff, they get in the playoff. That's not a blue blood, that's a power school, but they are usually a laughing stock in the sport, and they get in. So you're not having the Oklahomas of the world. They had a down year. You're not just having blue bloods in major markets. You're getting non-blue bloods, traditionally bad programs. If they somehow get money, then they now can contend, and mid-majors or group of 5s having success. So yes, you need money. Yes, there are different ways you have to win now, and NIL is a part of that, and managing the portal and all of that is part of that. And it can be ruined in a blink of an eye. And I do think there are problems with the window being open now, and maybe we need to go to contracts, because having the NFL, you don't get to be a free agent every year, but in college sports, you do, if you're going to compare. But with all of that said, there are still clear paths for non-blue bloods and for group of 5 or mid-majors to have success. It happened in football. It didn't happen as much in this NCAA tournament in basketball. But if it happened in football, which is even tighter and harder, then it can happen certainly in basketball. And you're even seeing, as we're going to get into later, when you're talking about the coaching carousel, there still was a big name that chose to go to a basketball first school that is not a football power, in Richard Pitino going to Xavier instead of some football schools, and even actually turning down Villanova, and then rumors about WVU and all of that, going to Xavier, a pure on basketball school, not in a power, at least football conference. So that clearly tells you that he believes you can win at a non football power school, and it's also evident too. But there are storylines, there are ratings, there are numbers, and it can be done. And in football, I mean, when Indiana gets in the playoff with 3 bowl wins in a century prior, that shows you it can happen. Boise State too. Those stories can happen in basketball, and maybe will happen next year. But you had a lot of teams that had better years than normal, because even though people, if they're just casual fan, they may just look at a bracket and say, well, Maryland, they're normally good in basketball. They're normally better in basketball than football. Of course they're there. But as you know, you're saying with your coverage, they haven't been there in 10 years. So this is not a normal thing since you've been covering the program. Auburn
Yeah.
is a football school. They're not a basketball school. For them to be a prohibited favorite to win at all, that is not a normal thing. Florida, it's been a decade and a half since they've been a real national power, and they're back again. They usually have tournament failures early on in these runs, and Calipari, everyone knows him, but it is a 10 seed. So those are not, it's chalky in seeds, but if a program's doing something for the first time in a decade, that's not as chalky as the seed line may say.
It's, yeah, when we look at like aforementioned Michigan State, Purdue was a team that got knocked out early in recent years. Alabama, Nate Oates, the big, the successful program he's built there in the last 3. Alabama basketball wasn't relevant for, I don't want to say the entirety of its existence, but most of our adult lives. And then in the last 3 seasons,
until a few years ago,
they've been able to pull it out.
Purdue had the 1 year where they went to the final, by the way. Let's not forget that.
Oh yes, yeah. I'm saying
they did do it once, but yeah.
In the last, but like most of our adult lives.
Oh yeah, they're not a team that normally does that. Yeah, 100%.
Correct. So Gators, of course, went back to back in 06 and 07. Corey Brewer, UD, and then
you could argue the love spread out. I mean, when we were kids, West Virginia made their Final Four run, and other programs can do it. It's not just blue bloods. But if you were a Alabama or a school that all your resources are pretty much mostly all in football, then you kind of were, everyone kind of knew, like, well, Alabama's not going to contend in basketball, and they don't care. They want to win in football. Now those programs can contend in both sports. Obviously, there's money to do it, but you're seeing football powers contend in basketball, and Alabama is arguably a better basketball program than they are a football school as we're speaking right now, post Saban. So that wouldn't have been a thing a decade and a half ago. So you are losing the Cinderella story, but you are getting unconventional teams to go far, and teams doing something that they don't normally do in their history, certainly on the basketball side of things.
And kind of the same thing. Again, I'm using small sample sizes here. Michigan is a program that had been to the Final Four under Juwan Howard. This was a team that won 9 games last year and was the worst team in the Big Ten. Right. And they hired Dusty May. And I
mean, they had the Beeline year more recently, but with that run,
yes. Yeah. And they go and they win the Big Ten tournament, kind of third in the regular season, the Big Ten, and now they're in the Sweet 16 a year after missing the tournament and being awful last year in a coaching change. So
it shows you in this era, whether it be football or basketball, because everyone's worried about a coach leaves, we're screwed for 5 years. I hear that all the time from fans. If you get the right coach in place and you handle the portal NIL right and you handle the roster right, you can walk in more so than 20 years ago. You can walk in 1 year on the job and instantly win. And Dusty May is that example. He was coming from a mid-major 1 year in. Yes, the program had success under Beeline. We're in that final game. They did win a national title with Fisher before the Fab Five, and then they obviously got those appearances with the Fab Five. There is some history there of 20, 30 years, but it's been a roller coaster ride. It's either been big peak or it's been real bad. And as you just mentioned, it was real bad. They look for a coach, and then they get the top coach on the market, and then they instantly get rewarded by right away they're having success. And they want more than that. They want to win an international title and get to a Final Four again. But 1 year, in all reality, the rest is gravy for a lot of schools. I mean, George, you could even argue, and maybe your readers wouldn't want to hear this, but Michigan or Maryland, if Maryland would lose and just that's it, Sweet 16, when you're doing something for the first time in a decade, you could argue that the rest is gravy now. Like it's a successful year when you get to Sweet 16, even if you get blown out the next game and you don't go far, that shouldn't be some albatross that everyone's going to scream, well, this is an embarrassment. If you're doing something for the first time in a decade, obviously it's good, even if it's not the peak of the program in its history. And then they can worry about potential drama that'll come. But that in terms of just on the court, it would be hard to be mad about a year that does something for the first time in a while. And the only program that I think is facing pressure that they cannot lose early, and they do have to make a Final Four. I'll get this out there now.
Mm-hmm.
While I think Maryland's kind of playing with house money, same thing with Michigan, despite histories. When you're looking at it for the first time in a while, you have to kind of think of that. Even Calipari, first year with Arkansas, etc. And I know I said Auburn's a football school and they're not a basketball school, really. Look at Charles Barkley and that's it for a Hall of Famer. When you're the prohibited 1 seed all year and you do have a coach that's been there and done it before, even if not at your school, because Bruce Pearl did do it at Tennessee in terms of a deep run, then they do have pressure to probably at least get to a Final Four. I'm not going to say you have to win a national championship, but if they lose in the Sweet 16 or don't even get out of the Elite Eight, a school that was top of those charts all year with the money and a great coach who's a veteran coach, even if they're a football first school like Auburn, that is a school that has to make the Final Four. They have the most pressure on them. Maybe you could say Duke and Houston as well. Duke always has it. They always have to go far. Their fans always expect it. And Houston's made a deep run, but they want to win a national title. They didn't even do that decades ago with a great team. But Houston and Auburn are those teams that at minimum they got to get to the Final Four. They have the most pressure on them for sure.
And it's the SEC has, kind of beat the rap of 14 teams, most ever, beating the Big East of our era that sent 11, if memory serves me correctly, back in the days when it was a 16-team Super League. Shout out to the old Big East. SEC sends 14 this year. And, kind of predictably, some of the lesser ones fell off. Georgia, which was on the bubble for, I don't know, most of the last 2 months of the season, they lose in an 8-9 to Gonzaga. Texas, who then fires its coach and, hires Sean Miller away from Xavier. Just to name Oklahoma, just to name a couple of those low-end teams. But
Texas only a couple years removed from the Elite Eight, by the way. They've been in the tournament 3 years in a row and the Elite Eight two years ago. So it's not like they were a losing program, and that is a football first school. You could argue firing a coach in that scenario is a little unreasonable. I mean, they basically are expecting Elite Eight every year. They just did it in 2023. That one Elite Eight in 3 years is – if Maryland made one Elite Eight every 3 years at more of a basketball school, there's no way you're calling for Willard to be fired. They just did it, and that's a football school.
And did it as a Big 12 member, and so to kind of like sustain some of that success in a historically great SEC, in a historically great conference ever, is almost to be like applauded in your first year in the league.
They get in the tournament at least, even though you could argue they shouldn't have been there.
Yeah. But that league got so many teams because, in my opinion, those lower teams got to play those upper teams, and thus it rising tide lifts all boats. So you've got your Alabamas, your Auburn's, your Tennessees, Florida, Kentucky. Kentucky is fascinating to take that program that we mentioned, a loss in shocking loss in the opening round last year.
They're fine without Calipari, it appears.
And now both teams in Arkansas and Kentucky in the Sweet 16 after how that went last year for Big Blue Nation is kind of astounding.
Because you had Kentucky fans at the time were saying that Calipari lost, that he no longer could get a deep run, and he obviously proved that wrong because he has one with Arkansas. But those same fans who are going to say that you were underachieving with this talent, they can say, well, they also were right because now they go farther than he's been in the last several years with the same program, even though different players. So that is kind of a weirdness. Yeah, for sure. There's another storyline like that. There's a lot of storylines this year, even if you don't have a Cinderella.
Yeah. I want to say that Florida has the easiest road. I think that that Midwest is the Midwest bracket with Purdue, Houston, Tennessee, and Kentucky.
Right.
Just like that, that's a beatdown one. Duke, Arizona, Alabama in the other one. Florida's got Maryland, who is a program that's undergoing a ridiculous amount of turmoil that we'll talk about here in a few moments. Texas Tech, with no disrespect to them, but they're probably the weakest of all the 3 seeds
Probably, yeah.
going into the tournament. And
I
then,
mean, you
of
could
course,
argue Iowa State. Iowa State would be the argument.
sure, and same league too.
Right.
And
They're
then
both Big 12,
Arkansas,
yeah.
who's the lowest seed remaining in the tournament. So Florida, presumably, with as good as they are, SEC tournament champions. With a win over Florida, they're going to get, or with a win over the Terps, they're going to get either Tech or Arkansas, and so
Right.
they've, in my opinion, have the easiest path there. But
Yeah, at least seed wise. I mean, if they get past Maryland, you could argue that Maryland might be a harder game than they're going to see after that. I
yes,
mean,
mm-hmm.
depending on things. So, yeah.
Is there one overall team that sticks out as, unassailable buzzsaw type of team? I like what, and I know I mentioned Florida there. It's because I've scouted them here for my Maryland research, but I like Auburn. I like what Janai Broom.
I mean,
Has
they've been one of the best
great.
teams all year, right? I mean,
Yeah,
if not the best.
I think that it's kind of like finally put together that they can do this in basketball. They've had some hiccups
Yeah.
before. I really I like Houston just from the leadership aspect and the experience that they bring, but I'm not as sold on Duke. I know Duke's the catch-all pick for a lot of people, and Shire's coach of the year nominee and everything, but as our Bruce Pearl, as our Kelvin Sampson, but a lot of people kind of, I think, defaulting to Duke, and I just think some of these other teams might have the slight edge there in terms of experience.
Well, it also depends on how healthy you're getting with Cooper Flagg, because when you have an NBA prospect who many believe, I don't know if I really buy that he's a generational player. This isn't LeBron James out there, or even Carmelo Anthony if you're going to a college player, but that's kind of the vibe you're getting around NBA circles, that he could be that guy. So if that's what you believe, separate from the program, separate from the coach, you're usually going to lean on that player. Obviously, he went in the tournament not healthy, and Duke would be an easy pick. In my bracket, I picked Houston to win it all. And maybe it's because I've seen the most out of the good teams in terms of covering the Big 12 and Auburn, Florida, those other teams you could certainly pick as well. And a lot of people did pick Duke, but Houston is a team to me that really speaks to the Pat Riley saying from the Showtime Lakers, no rebounds, no championships. Like, they are the team that is just going to rebound the lights out. They're going to score enough points, even if they don't get to, say, a BYU level in scoring in terms of total points on an average. They rebound, they get second chance points, they take it away from you. They have the size, they obviously have the coach. And this is also a team that we've seen in sports where sometimes, and it's harder in college sports with an IL and the roster different every single year, but maybe even for Kelvin Sampson, that sometimes you have to knock on the door, get there, then face heartbreak, and then you pull through. They've kind of done that progression now for several years in a row. That's why I think with Auburn, they have the most pressure. Like, they have to get this done at some point, or Kelvin Sampson can argue as a Hall of Fame coach maybe someday, but it'll kind of be a stain on him that you didn't do this. And George, Houston, kind of that program in college basketball history. I mean, even going their heyday, they get right there. They have one of the greatest upsets of all time where they don't win a national title. So this would actually be the first. And if you're talking basketball in the city, you're talking about the Houston Rockets in the mid-90s, obviously the Houston Astros in the World Series, but for basketball, and it's a basketball great area, it's been a while in general. So there's pressure for them to do this. I think they can. I think they have the team and the horses to do it. I think the bracket can line up for them, but there's certainly pressure there. So Houston is my pick to win it all. But yeah, I mean, it definitely lines up for Auburn for sure. It's hard to fully buy in, but it definitely lines up for Auburn. I do have them. Then you have the Fighting Izzos, of course. I mean, you never want to count on Tom Izzo. Usually they lose early, or once they get to this point, he knows how to get the most out of his team. Again, I'd be interested, if anyone can stop BYU in terms of their hot and cold streakiness if they get hot. I mean, George, you need to basically score 80 points a game to be hanging with them if they're hot. I mean, they're chucking threes all over the place and they're scoring. There's not that many teams in history, let alone in this tournament, that are clipping off that many points on the regular through March Madness. So, because usually teams win and they're not having their best nights. Usually either a player takes it over or you get lucky or there's a Cinderella story or funky things happen. But they are just such an offensive juggernaut that when you look at a bracket that has Alabama and those teams, can anyone hang with them offensively unless they get really cold? So if you tell me, I believe Houston is a team that maybe could win it all. I have them picked to win it all. But if you want to give a kind of a dark horse pick to go to a Final Four that nobody is picking to go far or at least beyond this point, I think BYU is a team to watch because of what they can do offensively. And Michigan State's a 2 seed and they have a Hall of Fame coach, but no one's really picking them to go too much further. But can you really count out Tom Izzo? And then, then Calipari, I don't think they're going to go much further. This is kind of gravy for him at this point. But Texas Tech is absolutely a beatable team. They're in a very favorable bracket by eventually getting out of the game with St. John's. And then, Tennessee's vulnerable. Kentucky, I think they're vulnerable, even though they're a very good team. The SEC was the best conference in college basketball this year, even though normally when you say that about the SEC, you're saying it in football being the best conference. And, I do think the Big 12 had a down year this year, but could easily be back next year. They had recent national champions in Baylor, in Kansas. Texas Tech did. People talking about Texas Tech, George, you kind of allude to them being kind of a Cinderella story. They did make the final a couple years ago before this UConn streak. So before UConn went back to back, you were seeing a lot from the Big 12. It can happen again. Obviously, the Big 10 wakes up this year as well, and the Big East has had UConn and now other programs. So conference-wise, there's a lot of quality conferences and a lot of quality depth, but I think there are teams that are really, really good, but I don't know, if I can fully see them going far. I would say in terms of a team that, that I don't, that I'm the most confident in, it's the Houstons, it's the Dukes, and it's the Auburns of the world. And I have Houston going all the way, but another one is BYU. And, there's a lot of teams that are beatable. So again, there's a lot of these games, even in the Sweet 16, as we're ahead of that right now here on Wednesday, that it could go either way in some of these matchups, and that could change the dynamic of what happens the rest of the tournament.
Speaking of changing dynamics that happen here in the rest of the tournament, the rest
I do want to
of
add
the
one thing though before we get to the carousel.
Oh yeah, please do.
I just want to add one point, and this again because you covered Maryland. Again, a great season, going to the Sweet 16. Willard's a great coach. This is the first time in a while for the program. It's already house money. However, 100% of travel on the game-winning shot. 100% of travel.
Oh, wow. Okay.
100% travel.
Gene Steratore says it's not. LeBron James said no.
LeBron James has traveled himself in his career. The NBA doesn't have traveling, basically.
I've conditioned myself to watch.
I don't think it was a travel on the initial part of it, but there was a stutter step on the second. It was like 3 or 4 movements and then the stutter step at the end before the shot. The second part of that play is a travel, 100%.
If we're using the literal college interpretation, which college does not account for what we like to collectively now call the gather step in the NBA.
Which they don't call in the NBA, by the way. NBA doesn't. James Harden's been traveling his whole career.
Oh, no.
The NBA basically forgets travel. Even that, I'm saying the NBA doesn't even call what they have.
In the NBA, the gather step is permissible. In the NCAA, it's supposed to be 1, 2, and if the first foot, which is the pivot foot, moves again,
it moved 100%. 100% moved. 100%.
I would contend
you're not going to call that on a game-winning moment for a program doing something first time in a decade, but it was a travel. I don't think you're going to call it, but it's a travel.
I would contend, as Gene Steratore did, that him bobbling the ball on his first of his 3 steps counts as him establishing and then 1, 2 up. So shout out DQ.
Yeah, it was again, you're not gonna call it in that. There's no way anybody would have got called. I mean, that would be if you would have called a travel there and then Maryland ends up losing and that's the moment there, that would even be more controversial, but it was 100% a travel. 100%.
It's not blatant at eye speed, full speed, but when you slow it down and analyze it, I can see where people would believe that. to be
What
the
you're
case.
supposed to be able to do with replay, by the way, I mean, what you're supposed to do, the letter of the law, is yes, you called the way. I could see calling it that way, but I mean, I would even prefer them going with the NFL's type of system where if it's in the final couple minutes or if it's a game-winning play, we're just
There's
automatically
By
reviewing.
the final 2 minutes take 35 now. We can't be going back and looking at
Well, but
every,
the final play of the game that could win a game,
yeah, they
you
got to be
don't want to get wrong because you're worried about TV audience. It's
they
not
dinged it off,
ridiculous to review that play.
they put the requisite 0.2 of a second on the clock because there were still 0.2 when the ball went through the hoop or whatever. So
Yeah, I'm not saying you review every play in the final 2 minutes. I'm saying the game-winning play that is
I'm saying
controversially
they're already
done.
reviewing every play in the final 2
No,
minutes.
but I'm saying that play right there needs reviewed and multiple times. I mean, that needs really dissected. If you're going to take 20 minutes on a review, that's the play to do it. I don't want to see all the other plays reviewed 20 minutes long, but I don't. I mean, I think you have a gripe if you're the losing coach and they're like, we want to do 30 seconds of review so we can get home to our family. No, I'm trying to. This is March
They
Madness.
checked and looked, and the basket was good and clean for them, and they added time on the clock as well.
They didn't
So.
check and look long enough. It was 100%.
What do you mean? What do you want them more time? You want them to look
No,
more?
I 100. As I said, it doesn't matter now, but Brett Hall's foot was in the crease and this was a travel. It doesn't mean the Stars didn't win a cup, but like, I'm not saying if Maryland wins the title, they can certainly, they count as a championship, but I don't think that anybody should be refusing to admit that it was a travel.
Okay.
Is all I'm saying. 100% a travel.
Many of the plates
change
that are
the banner,
spinning
but it was 100%
here in this March Madness, much like when I thought about it today, as we were talking about the college football playoff just a few months ago, and how the windows and the timing of things that the NCAA actually has power over, which it's a feckless organization that doesn't have seemingly much control over anything these days. It does have the power to set some of these calendar dates, and here we are with a transfer portal window opening up the week between the first round of the tournament and the first and second rounds of the tournament and the third and fourth rounds of the tournament. And we've got the portal window opening. We've got the coaching carousel, which of course spins at the end of the regular season, like it does in football as well, when teams, fire coaches or release coaches.
I mean, Jay Billis says it spins year round. That's always his tweet. This spins year round.
I mean, it does spin year round, but which will leads into the point here that we're going to discuss first, which is Darren DeVries, and it does spin year round, but it starts to slow down and the ride stops, and you figure out who you're settled down with in the game of musical chairs when the season ends. That's kind of, your first milestone.
Well, you can't officially announce anything earlier, but I mean, it's spinning. You're doing things.
Oh, sure. So for the folks in Bloomington, Indiana, it started spinning the midpoint of this season when, longtime head coach Mike Woodson, also formerly of the New York Knicks, had announced that he would be stepping down at the end of Indiana's season. Indiana nearly backdoors in. They're the second team out of the tournament after West Virginia, and by proxy and osmosis, that means they get West Virginia's coach somehow. No, I'm kidding. So Darren DeVries, after West Virginia doesn't get into the NCAA tournament, after what they believed and everybody else in the country believed was the wrong decision to leave them out based on the metrics, then their head coach up and runs off to Indiana in a move, Mike, that appears to be that, as we look back on the history of this season now, was premeditated in a lot of ways, potentially as early as November, when West Virginia and Indiana were in the same tournament in the Bahamas. Right. And DeVries, after, feigning whatever level of, discontent that his team was left out of the NCAA tournament, passed over in the NCAA tournament selection show. A day later is gone to Indiana, which I understand the pedigree and the prestige of the program,
Well, they're paying him a lot of money too. He's getting more than most coaches in the conference
Well, they're paying him a
in
lot
terms
of
of the
money.
NIL. The
I mean,
NIL.
West Virginia wasn't going to exactly match it, but West Virginia was prepared to give him resources in other places to keep him there.
No, they were prepared to offer a contract extension of also more money. Ren Baker literally said I was not allowed to. He did not get to offer this to DeVries.
Yeah.
He told us that he had more money from donors, he had more money to NIL, and he had more money for a salary. I'm sure not to Indiana's level, but he was not able to offer. He did not officially get to offer a contract extension. DeVries just told him, "I'm taking this. No longer wish to speak to you." Like there was no give or take. But he did. He also did add, which it was also one of the most misreported stories in the entire country because there were people on the internet that claimed he was going to Iowa all season long. And DeVries, Renbaker, everybody pretty much then admitted that through the entire season, which leads more credence to believing that he was in cahoots with Indiana the whole time, because they all said that he was getting calls from many programs in the country. He turned them all down, including Iowa. So all of the Iowa reporting as recent as 2 weeks before he went to Indiana, people were trying to say he was going to Iowa, could not possibly have been true. Either people were making it up, which I am accusing many people of making this up. Either they were making it up or they were getting wrong information, but he was never going to Iowa. It was clearly always Indiana. And Renbaker knew about the rejection of Iowa, knew about the rejection of other schools, but was not able to make the counteroffer to Indiana. And whether you believe it was in the Bahamas or whether you believe it was in February or wherever, because Renbaker also did say, WVU's AD, that him and Darren DeVries started talking contract extension at WVU, which he didn't get to officially offer, but they started having conversations in February, which the first week of February was a very busy time. Not only are they having those conversations, but in that same week, WVU officially announces that Tucker DeVries is out for the year when most of us thought he was going to be out for the year a month earlier, and he hadn't played since December 6th. And he was just announced as out for the year 2 months later. And during that whole time, by the way, Darren DeVries would not allow questions about Tucker in press conferences. You sneak them in, but then you were reprimanded by the program. He made it very clear he did not want them asked. And he played 8 games. If he played 9, he wouldn't have eligibility left. He played right to the bar to be able to come and play for Indiana next year. So there's a lot of dirtiness there. There's a lot of reason for West Virginia fans to feel like there was a conspiracy here. Obviously, the only thing I can say to Darren DeVries' credit, even no matter when you believe he was conspiring, clearly he coached his ass off in January because that's when they beat Kansas on the road. He had 3 top 10 wins, 4 ranked wins. They had 6 quad 1 wins, which is more. Some of the programs that we mentioned in the Sweet 16 segment, George, did not have 6 quad 1 wins. Yep. And North Carolina that got in had 1. So they had 6 quad 1 wins and 19 overall. If you remember, when Maryland played West Virginia in the end of Huggins, West Virginia's resume that year was worse than this one, and they were in the tournament with 19 wins and barely anything in quad 1 play. And you could certainly now believe, were they helping out a Hall of Fame coach versus now they don't care about without Huggins. But they didn't get in, the blue blood got in. But any conspiracy you want to believe that the NCAA was helping Indiana, or they didn't want West Virginia because they wanted they knew DeVries was already gone, or Tucker didn't play, which I don't think is a fair reason, but maybe they already knew that was in cahoots. Some of this sounds like wild conspiracy, but the way the timeline works, it lends credence for believing this for even the craziest fan, because it just looks crazily and all dirty. And you know, at the end of the day, he ends up at Indiana. I don't think that's a job you can turn down, even though the last 25 years, West Virginia has had more success. That's money. I mean, if Indiana football can go to the playoff in year 1 when they've been bad for 100 years, you certainly can resurrect a blue blood, even if they haven't been great. I think people are also being unfair to that program. They got in the tournament as recent as 2023. They had a Sweet 16 as recent as 2016, which we're looking at the same timeline as Maryland, who people think is a basketball hotbed. If you think Indiana's been trashed, the last 10 years have been almost the same. Indiana has been in a Final Four this century, even though it was the beginning part of the century. They're not what they were under Knight in the 70s, 60s, and 80s, or even 90s, but it's not like they've been garbage. And you're going to have a lot more money there. So I get taking the job, but the dirtiness was there. The conspiracy is reason and there. And then that segues into a coaching carousel that I've already put out in my coverage in my show covering the Mountaineers. I think West Virginia swung and missed. I don't think they won this coaching search when they won it a year earlier, getting DeVries the second best coach on the market in that session.
And we'll talk about Russ Hodge here in a minute. That West Virginia has signed to be their next head coach, the fourth head coach in 4 seasons, including the final year of Bob Huggins' tenure. Do you, I hear what you say on Indiana and the CFP, and obviously what Cignetti did there is impressive, especially in that league. But I'll mention the league again, which is now 18 teams, the Big Ten, and I'm not entirely sure.
I mean, bear in mind, I said all season I think Cignetti took advantage of an easy schedule. That was an easy schedule.
Yes.
I don't think I would.
Yeah.
That was an easy schedule. So that is the added caveat that you could argue is controversially that they were in, but they did get in factually.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So in basketball, I'm more likely to believe that Indiana, and I'll make a bad apples to oranges comparison here, that Indiana basketball becomes a Tennessee-like football, a Nebraska-like football, where we're chasing this thing that we had decades ago when there were only...
Well, Tennessee's almost picked it up recently, though. They've been good recently.
I know. We were chasing this thing from decades ago when we won a national title, when there were less, people in the pool, and the resources were concentrated, and you didn't have all this movement. And Indiana's chasing that, and I don't believe it's that attainable, because they're already the other program in their state, Purdue, has been better than them in the last 20 years than they have.
I have a similar comparison that'll be counter to what you're saying.
Your best talent is generally... Indiana was a state of basketball, and you got to keep all those people there when they couldn't go places and they couldn't transfer as easily. Now those kids can go anywhere. Purdue's kids are all home. You didn't have any. Matt Painter is one of the best coaches in America.
I'd imagine DeVries is going to go across the country, though. I mean, he's not going to just get Indiana kids.
Oh, no. I understand that. I just believe that I'm not sure. Am I saying that I'm not saying they can't make it to an Elite Eight or something like that in the future. There's not going to be this, we're going to return Indiana to this 5-time or whatever national championship glory, like Carolina's had glory, like Duke's had glory.
But it also depends on it depends on how reasonable you're being, because North Carolina has won some national titles, but before the turn of this century, they only had 2 with Dean Smith in 40 years. Like, you can't expect Indiana to do an undefeated season or win 3 in 6 years, something Bob Knight did. You can't expect that. But what I'm saying is, if Darren DeVries does the Dusty May thing and gets them in the NCAA tournament and wins a game or 2 in year 1, then it's worth all the money spent and all the dirtiness. And I'm not saying that. I don't think the expectations have to be year 1. You got to be a blue blood again. Like, you have to be reasonable with what you're expecting. But the other end of this is
he
could easily get fired. I mean, if they suck for 2 years and miss the tournament in 2 years in a row, they probably will fire him 100%.
In West Virginia, he's got a big, he's in a major conference, access to playing these great teams year in, year out, the Kansases, the Houstons, etc. And you've probably got like a 5-year plus runway at WVU. Indiana the people there might give him 3, maybe 4 years, and if it's not them being in a place,
I think 2 or 3. I think it's a year less on.
Like in my mind, it's like 3. And after year 3, if we're not talking about multiple Sweet 16 and/or Elite 8 runs, I think
that's where you're getting too much. I think you don't have to go to the Elite 8 in year 1 or go to 2 of them in 2 years.
But those people have such a standard for their program that I believe is outdated.
I mean, they let Woodson linger when he wasn't doing that, though. Again, they haven't been to a Sweet 16 since 2016, and he was lingering. So they didn't fire him. They actually let him respectively do the thing where he
but they hated him. Indiana.
Well, but they may not like him. That's a different. But that's a different thing. The fans may not like it, but I don't think the program. I don't think if DeVries does not get to an Elite 8 next year, the program is going to.
Oh, the program will have patience, but
they're going to have more patience. The fans maybe are going to get mad.
You and I both know that
the program is going to feel that way.
Oh, yeah. But you and I both know that those outside pressures, whether they want to admit to it or not, will shape some of the decisions.
But the
And
comparison that I was going to give, if you want to go to an historic football brand and bringing in a coach and having unreasonable expectations, instead of Nebraska and Tennessee, the comparison that could be and what Darren DeVries has to hope for is actually when Michigan brought in Harbaugh. Prior to Michigan bringing in Harbaugh, they were a blue blood football program, but the 97 title is a co-share. Prior to that, they hadn't won since the 40s. They have a bunch, but a lot of them are all controversial. And they won. Lloyd Carr was there, but their fans were kind of sick of Lloyd Carr. They weren't really elite. They're barely getting in bowl games at that point. They bring in Harbaugh already with a Super Bowl appearance. He comes in, he walks in the door and says, I want to restore this to blue blood status. I want to win a national title, but he admitted it's not going to be a quick thing. And they went through a roller coaster ride where some of their fans were out on him. It was rough early on. Then it got good. Obviously, there's the controversy, but they did win a national championship, and then he left. But they eventually got the max out of it, and they gave him time. And the program gave him more time than the fans, is what I'm saying. The fans wanted Harbaugh fired 4 or 5 years ago, and the program kept saying, no, we believe in him. We're going to stay the course. I think Indiana's made an investment financially into DeVries, who's still a young coach in his 40s, that they're not going to give him only 1 or 2 years. They're going to give him the time. At minimum, they're going to – obviously Calipari is a Hall of Fame coach, but Calipari, they're going to give him that type of runway where year 1, it's gravy. Year 2, you got to certainly, win a couple of tournament games or so. Year 3 or 4, they got to get at least Sweet 16 or Elite 8. But I don't think it's going to be that you have to have multiple Elite 8s in the first 2 years, or you got to immediately go to a Final Four. It's going to be Dusty May at Michigan. If he loses tomorrow, they're not going to fire him. And that, I don't think it's going to be above that from the program. The fans, yes, but I think there's a chance that the second Harbaugh went to Michigan, he instantly got them more pizzazz and eventually got them back to blue blood status. DeVries could maybe do the same thing. And of course, there's a risk there for DeVries because number one, a lot of other programs in the country have been speaking out on this, and even the coaches have spoke out on this, that they think he did WVU dirty. So if he gets fired in 2 years, yeah, he's going to get a job. He's a great coach, but it's not like his stock is that great. There might be some people that say, okay, we're mad at you for what you did there. And his leash would have been longer at WVU. And also, even by being snubbed in the tournament, they could have got ahead in the transfer portal. He could have really made a run next year if they would have been able to argue Tucker next year. Yeah, Small was going to leave and had eligibility gone, but they could have got ahead in the portal. They could have come and been a preseason top 15 team with DeVries, a tournament snub. Small was at one point arguably a Big 12 player of the year. He was putting all that together this year. Who knows what he could do next year in recruiting? And their high school recruiting class was great. A lot of that's in question now, but that was what he was building there. And Ren Baker is somebody that absolutely will give you time. So I don't know if you give him 5 years, but I think he certainly would give him some time to certainly get in the tournament, have some success. You don't have to win right away once you're in, etc. Whereas Indiana, maybe they definitely would expect more and there's more pressure. But it's a dream job for him, and it's an incredible NIL investment. So if Michigan can go from 9 wins to the NCAA tournament and making a run, there's no reason why Indiana cannot. In basketball, we're not even talking football here. And I get it's the job that you just can't say no to if you think you're going to be a great coach, because winning at Indiana, even one national title in Indiana, it'll get you in a higher level than doing it at a lot of the schools we already mentioned, and arguably any of them outside of Kentucky or Duke. So because it's that elite program that you could resurrect something that Woodson didn't even do, that really hadn't happened since Knight. You'll be a god there. And also, George, maybe Curcinetti is a big loser here because all the donor money, yeah, they won in football, but the donors won another basketball natty more than they care about the football CFP. They want to put more into DeVries. There's a commitment of putting more into DeVries. So the basketball program still could be sitting pretty over football, despite football being more successful recently. It's still possible. I don't care about taking the job, but the way he handled it is the problem, especially if you are not talking about Tucker DeVries. I even said at the time on our shows, if he leaves, the problem is not that Tucker is not playing if he's hurt. I don't think he's faking an injury, but you can't not talk about the injury, borderline lie about it, and then
Yes.
have him not play, and that's why you missed the tournament, and then you leave, and then he's standing there in the press conference before West Virginia had even officially released him, by the way. He was at the presser before that. So, I mean, WVU could have been dirty and said, we're not going to, give you up, because there clearly was dirtiness here, but I don't hate him for taking the job in general. And most of the other coaching carousel, I think, kind of went mostly chalky as well. I don't think they went to the best jobs, but Ben McCollum stays in his state and goes to Iowa despite their a mess administration wise, AD wise, and NIL wise. They're a mess, but he goes there anyway. You stay in the same spot. I get it. Nico Medved, again, he stays in a similar geographic area. Will Wade goes to the ACC. That might fit him more. I get those scenarios, but West Virginia arguably had the best job available in this market where they didn't have the best job available last year and did better in that search, coming off a bad year in drama. This year, they came off a tournament snub, a 1 year turnaround from 9 to 19 wins, and I think one of the best AD athletic directors in the country. And I don't think they did well in the search. I think they basically were pigeonholed into Ross Hodge the whole time because they're friends from back in North Texas. They got pretty much the 6th, 7th guy on the market. And I'm telling you right now, if he does not have success within 2 years, I would not be shocked if in 3-4 years, Ren Baker is fired as AD, because I don't care about the rest of the athletic program. If football and men's basketball do not win, whether it's fair or not, because you didn't cause the Huggins stuff, if fair or not, you didn't cause Neil Brown, you didn't hire him initially, nor give him his initial buyout, fair or not, it's going to go on you. Like, I've been one of the most pro Ren Baker guys covering the team, but I think this is a really bad hire. I think the whole time, this is the first hire that it looked like all the media was wrong. And I also think, again, he was just really focused in on Ross Hodge the whole time, and maybe the landscape didn't dictate for him because of geography, but the brand and what that program could offer is better than a coach who's been a head coach only at that level, from an assistant to a head coach, only 2 years, never made an NCAA tournament. Your first NCAA tournament appearance should not be at a program like West Virginia. And I know he's in his 40s and him and Ren are friends and he probably won't leave next year. But if he goes and has only 12 wins next year after what DeVries just did, the fans could easily say a good coach turns it around from 9 to 19 in 1 year. Are you a worse coach? And who's he going to get recruiting wise, because they're not going to be impressed on this name? I know McAfee had LeBron, and that's the major thing to have today, but didn't say one word about the basketball hire. And when DeVries was hired, he was talking up a storm despite being a football guy. I would bet you money Pat McAfee doesn't even know who Ross Hodge is.
I mean,
currently speaking.
So,
Well, I mean, I knew the reason why I knew who he was is because I covered a coaching search a year ago with West Virginia, and I didn't think that he was going to be a candidate then because he was only 1 year in, but he was just one of those guys you mentioned because they have connection to Ren. So I studied him a year ago. But for him to get this job now is insane. And my last point on it, George, because anyone, and I'll even, there were some national media members that said, oh, they really swung and missed with Calhoun. It must have been about money. I'm going to simply say this, George. If you want to connect this to money, it's lazy reporting, because Jared Calhoun, who signed his extension with Utah State, he's getting $1.85 million at Utah State to stay there. That's just on the annual salary. Okay. Darren DeVries just made $2.85 at West Virginia. The year before, Josh Eilert, as an interim with no experience at all off drama, made 1.5. So Jared Calhoun, as a sexy candidate off an NCAA tournament, yes, it's a mid-major, is only making a little bit over what Josh Eilert made at WVU 2 years ago. And at that point, West Virginia had horrible finances. Ren Baker's walked in and mightily improved the finances. The NIL is one of the better in the country in terms of what they do collectively. There's a damn restaurant that the proceeds goes to NIL. I'm not saying they're blue blood or rolling in cash, but they're getting $6+ million, which is the largest buyout in men's basketball history, from Indiana. George, this is not a buyout over years and years like Rich Rod's was 20 years ago.
Within 30 days, I believe.
It's due within 60 days. They have to get it within 60 days from Indiana. It is not even just 6. The reason why I say 6+, DeVries leaving before April 30th kicks in even more. on the
Good
buyout.
question.
And the money they owe Drake, they don't have to pay that 37% anymore because DeVries, now Indiana owes it. So Indiana's literally paying 2 schools for DeVries. So it better work out or they really look crazy. But they're getting 6 plus. Rich Rod has said publicly, as well as Ren confirming that they are estimating, and I know from donor sources, the NIL is way more than it was with Neil Brown. They paid more on the staff. I'd imagine it's anywhere from 6 to 9, even though Neil Brown said it was 3.5. So you figure more NIL, even though it's not great, but more than it was before, and $6+ million. If you're getting $6+ million from anybody, you have enough money to buy out most coaches in the country, and certainly Ross Hodge from North Texas. And the reports are he's getting almost $3 million, which is insane for his resume, which is mostly full of junior college success. And his best season was in 2011. 2011. We're in 2025. That was his best season overall in his career, aside from maybe if you want to argue this one. And after that was mostly assistant work. And that's a lot of money to him. But I'm even going to go, because we're live here recording for anyone who's listening to the podcast archive. I'm going to guess this is a WVU fan, because right away I want to know where the money's going. This is what I'm calling all the WVU fans. Look at the math. They're getting 6 plus. He's making X. People are saying about the NIL. Where's the money? Where's the rest of the money going? They didn't use all the money for this search. They absolutely could have afforded Calhoun George. If they gave Darren DeVries $2.85 million when they had less money a year plus ago, off drama and off scandal, how can you tell me they couldn't afford Jarrett Calhoun now when he's getting 1.85? You can do a quick Google search and know that. You don't got to cover the program. So that cannot be the reason. Maybe they didn't. I think they clearly didn't want Jarrett Calhoun. Clearly didn't want him based on that math. But to say this is purely they couldn't afford anybody is just not factually accurate based on just what is out there. And we don't have to debate NIL. They're getting 6 plus from Indiana. That is factual. They're getting it. Ren has confirmed it. And George, we both have said many times that, I think part of what I do on this beat is I'm going to hold people to the fire on what they say literally.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you watched Ren Baker's press conference before this search really got underway. In that presser, because people can have all different reporting, my sources versus other sources, all that, he said out of his own mouth, we are in a position to compete in the Big 12 financially and nationally right now. And we will use most of the money on this coaching search. He didn't act like it from that moment on.
You still got
You
money.
Can't say that and then do this. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. You still got money to pay to Neil Brown as well after his firing. I'm with you on you were like the first, I don't want to say first, but like selection Sunday, within 3 days, DeVries is gone, official, confirmed, Lightning, 28th.
The other jobs were open before, though. Like Iowa was open.
Oh, yes. But
they weren't the first open.
So I say that to say that West Virginia had the opening. Fran McCaffrey was fired just like a day or two before that, after Iowa bowed out of the NCAA bowed out of the Big Ten tournament,
right,
and was going to miss. So all those open at the same time, and yet West Virginia's is the last one of those power conference ones filled. And I go back to your point.
Said based on what Ren said, George, that even though they fired him then, if they're saying that DeVries turned down Iowa in the middle of the season, they were illegally looking for a coach while they had one then.
Oh, that, yeah.
So
no,
they knew they were going to do it. I think the difference here is I truly believe Ren Baker did not think he was going to lose DeVries. So he was not ready for this like he was the Eilert search or after Eilert, like he was going into DeVries, like Iowa or Minnesota were. I don't think Ren was preparing for this all year. And I know he says with his spreadsheets, he's always ready to go, but they weren't going to fire their coach. These other programs fired their coach.
Yeah. And so that's not my point, because they may have known that they were going to make the move, but they didn't know they were going to hire Ben McConnell in the middle of the season.
Yeah.
So
right.
in the last week to 10 days, West Virginia is among these other programs, and in my opinion, should have better leverage than Iowa, with all due respect, and they're not really doing any because they don't play any defense. And
Minnesota, it's 100% a better job than Iowa basketball. 100%.
Minnesota, Xavier,
100%.
And I get, like you said in one of your tweets earlier,
I'll
guys.
rank the jobs in terms of all of them open. I think obviously you could argue Villanova at the top of them. If Maryland would come open, you could maybe argue there. Texas is not normally a great basketball program, but because of the SEC money, you could certainly argue there. And then West Virginia, I think, is a way better job than Minnesota or Iowa if we're talking about power jobs. The rest of them are mid majors. And George, I historically, West Virginia gets the edge in football over Maryland, but Maryland's certainly been a better basketball school. You could at least argue the last 40, 50 years. If you want to go back to Jerry West, we could argue that. But we've talked before, the West Virginia's NIL situation has been way more progressive than Maryland. If we're talking job for job, my point here is not that they would get these coaches, but the money that was coming in and the job that it is and the brand that it is and the national attention that you get. I think Ren Baker could have done a lot more. Like, I think he should have been calling Kevin Willard after the press conference and said, if you're unhappy there, I'm in the region. My NIL is more progressive, and I do got money coming in. And McAfee will put you on the damn show every day. Maybe that's a better job, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. You could say no, fine, and then move on. It really looks like he was just Ross Hodge the whole time and didn't care about any of these things. And that's a disservice if that's the case. But it does feel like that was the case because he was scared that, say, he brings in Kevin Willard and they have success and he leaves Maryland, then obviously a year from now, maybe a blue blood would call and he would leave. And he doesn't want to go through this again. And I don't want to cover it again. But I'm just saying, did he really get the best coach? And by the way, which I put out there today, and some people think I shouldn't have put it out there because it doesn't help the program, which is not my job by any means. But what I am saying, I am hearing from donors. And if you want proof that I've talked to more donors probably than others, I'm the only media member on the entire beat who's got a donor to go on record. So, again, they're not all the donors. Ken Kendrick, if you look at his tweet that he put out in this burner, he just basically said, I hope the guy's classy and a good coach. It wasn't an endorsement at all. Clearly, he doesn't seem happy about this.
You said, I read your story, and it was like Ken Kendrick. I'm laughing at burner because it really
I know that's him, by the way. That's why I put it in there.
It's just WV 1965, which I assume is the year he graduated. Yeah, and it's just like, it's like Ken Kendrick's got a Twitter account, son of a gun.
Well, but the thing is, if you click on it, it legitimizes that it's him because he has a lot of tweets on there. It's not just the one. He commented on Neil Brown. He commented way back. Like it's him. I've heard that from others. But regardless of his opinion,
people that live
regardless of his opinion,
so I've heard. Kevin
and I also think Ren Baker knew this was going to be received this way, George. And here's how I know. I know him well enough, and he's a smarter man than me. But here's how I know he knew this would be received poorly. Number one, he dumped it middle of the week. He did it hours after national reporting, not right away like Rich Rod, like, oh, yeah, you got me right. And like, we got our guy that we love. No, it was, oh, I'm not excited. Let's let this linger for hours and hours on end. And then you just, oh, here's a little graphic. Like, we're going to do it. Here's an email. There's no video. McAfee didn't say anything. Ren Baker gave a little tweet, but that's, all. The press conference, by the way, George, is we're looking at a week out because they're going to let him coach in the NIT, which I think is insane if you're a power job with the transfer portal open. He's claiming he's going to do both things from what we're hearing, but you have no players on the roster. And if they suck next year, he's going to have a billboard up. If he doesn't think so, he will. Like, there is a lot of pressure here. And also, George, in the press release, because I had people ask me, like, how do you all of a sudden have all these quotes from all of these coaches that you don't cover about the coach that you're going to cover? Because WVU gave them to me. They're in the press release. They're not even hidden. They put them out. They are trying to clearly say, fans, you don't know him. His resume is not that great. Here's somebody that you do like, and he said he's good. They got a recent national champion from the conference. Dusty May, by the way, is not a random person. Him and Ren Baker are basically best friends. So that's clearly why Dusty May is there. And the Texas Tech coach was at North Texas. So that's the connection there. And then Fran Fischel, if you didn't notice, they copied off Twitter. They just copy and pasted what was on Twitter, and that's his quote. They didn't ask him. It's just copied off of there. I had the story before they released it because it was on Twitter. So, but they put those in the release for a reason. The press release about him is the damn Declaration of Independence. It is 2 pages freaking deep to be able to read that thing because they're going back to when he was in 8th grade, crying out loud, talking about the man. Like, they're trying to sell this to the fans because they know. But because of the recent memory being bad, because of the pressure of the job, because of the history of the job, because you said there's now money, there's pressure to win right away. I do not think you want to go pressure. There, you could argue there's, besides DeVries, Indiana, now Ross Hodge has arguably the most pressure in the country going into next year. He has to be at minimum flirting with the NCAA tournament next year, or it is reason to say, why are you worse than DeVries? DeVries just did 9-19. You can't go 12, 13. You cannot do the John Beilein thing in this era.
He's worse than, I believe he'll be worse than DeVries because he's just not a good enough coach. With all due respect, I guess that's due to North Texas.
They play great defense is the only thing. You might like that.
I'm willing to half acquiesce if your coach if you're in the NCAA tournament. No, bullshit that he's going to coach North Texas in the NIT semi. I do not give a shit. You got to announce it. Which goes back to your point, which I believe it's just like it was this all along.
Which is insane.
If I had to guess, I'm guessing obviously Ren, who came from North Texas, is doing some kind of service / favor by not stirring the pot that it was going to be Hodge as early as last week, just to do their athletic department.
He took longer than these other programs that his search was longer. He literally took longer. And the weirdest thing is, George, I know you watch McAfee a lot. Do you remember when McAfee was talking to Pete Thamel right before this broke? I think it was literally an hour before the DeVries departure fully broke. He was behind it. And Thamel was very nonchalant. It almost appears that Thamel didn't know what Ren was going to do because he was very nonchalant and was like, West Virginia will be fine. They did this last year. The program's good. Money's better. They're going to be fine. He did that like they're going to be fine. And then it ends up being a 10-day search. Thamel was telling people it was going to be real quick. It was not quick at all. It was long. But I do think it's a bit of a mirage on how long it went. You certainly should announce until 2 p.m. It was nationally out there at 8 in the morning. What are we lingering for? What are we lingering for? Like that tells me that you're trying to make people think. And George, I don't know if you saw this too. 24 hours earlier, there were different, mostly burner accounts. There are different people that were trying to say, they brought up Richard Pitino. Different names are getting brought up. I mean, that wasn't a legit thing, but it feels like not even just myself, but it feels like from national on down that Ren Baker almost made a fool of the media in general, overall, globally, including Thamel and myself, because anything that a source was saying was wrong on this, and he'd end up clearly being the original guy who arguably is the worst candidate of the whole bunch. And the weirdest thing is, I will say, the exact same sources that clearly were wrong on this basketball search were correct on the entire football search that I also covered. So it's hard to say the sources are bad sources. Again, Ren had his guy, and the only thing I can kind of give him a pass for, George, maybe he quickly texted Ross and said, we got to do it this way. You're pretty much the only one I can guarantee won't leave me at the altar next year. So maybe you're a worse coach, but if I win big, then, Pitino, Willard, whoever, McCollum, they're going to leave. You won't, because this is the best job you could get right now. And maybe that was part of it. But George, and I use this analogy on my show, that if you're married to somebody or dating somebody, you obviously don't want anybody else trying to flirt with them or asking them out, okay? You don't want anybody sliding in. You might get pissed at them. But you know what you also say in the back of your mind? Okay, brush my shoulders off. Clearly I got an attractive girl because obviously everyone else is interested in her, and I'm more impressed that she's not interested in them. This scenario is Ren Baker's almost thinking, I don't even have a shot at the 10. Why shoot my shot? I have a girl that's a 4, and nobody wants to slide in. Nobody wants her. That should give you concern. Like, what's wrong with her? Why does no one want you? If West Virginia did not hire Ross Hodge, he was going to coach at North Texas next year. Nobody else wanted this man. If McCollum didn't go to Iowa, then he was probably going to go to West Virginia or somewhere else. He was going to go to a power school. He was going somewhere. So was Medved. Ross Hodge is the only coach hired in this cycle that was not going to go to a power school. He wasn't ready. This is 2 years out from where he should be going to a power school. This is too big of a job. and it's going to end up getting Renfire if it doesn't work out. And I absolutely think there's pressure to make the tournament next year. And if the press conference is he's a program builder, that's bad because you just went to a tournament snub last year.
And to your point there, like if I'm going to go with a guy like that, then my mind went to a guy whose name, excuse me, whose name wasn't brought up in West Virginia's search, but would fit that same criteria with less postseason experience in Darius Nichols, who coached at Radford. He's coaching at LaSalle now. If I'm going to go for a guy like you said, who is just going to be at that same job next year and isn't that coveted, why don't I go with a guy who's played in the program and has been a Mountaineer? If I'm
I'll
gonna
give you the
that far off the board of like major guys.
Yeah, but I'll give you the answer. I'll give you the answer. Number one, nothing against Darius Nichols, but his value is clear when his move is LaSalle. He might as well have stayed at Rider.
I know.
He honestly shouldn't have changed jobs. That looks bad. And I've heard that from coaches who are like, it's a joke he went to LaSalle. It's a lateral move. You might as well have stayed where you were.
Radford. Yeah.
You might as well have stayed there. Yeah. And number two, if you've noticed with Ren searching, the only coach he's ever hired from volleyball to men's basketball, to football, to women's basketball, to baseball, whatever. The only coach he's hired that has connections outside of ascending Sabins is Rod. He hires his guys that have connections to him. So if you're going to hire a guy that you guarantee won't leave, he would probably feel more allegiance to a guy that was with him versus a guy that played and was around WVU. He didn't care about WVU when Darius Nichols was there. I'm sure he knows he played there, but I don't think he knows Darius Nichols that well. So that, I think, is where people sometimes get wrong on these searches. They meet with West Virginia. They immediately go to all the WVU connected guys. Yeah. Ren Baker is an outsider. I think Rich Rod was a unique experience. He had the best resume. He's not 70. He's still in his 60s. He's hungry for the atonement. They're making a lot of money by him coming back. That was clearly what the donors wanted. So he did appease them. But what Ren Baker normally does is not what the donors want, and it's normally all Ren Baker guys. And to his credit, George, to his credit, because this needs said for anyone who doesn't follow the program, it has worked so far. I mean, Mark Kellogg is not who anybody wanted, and he has been a home run hire. Clearly.
And DeVries and Don.
Even volleyball, he went out to, he's still a Pac-12 coach. Like, he does not go to West Virginia connections at all besides Rich Rod. So I'm not surprised it wasn't Darius Nichols here. I don't think he was ever in play at all. We had him on our board as a long shot, but he was, I honestly don't think he even got an interview. I mean, at all.
So no, it puts West Virginia behind, the 8 ball here a little bit, because obviously you liked the progress that DeVries had done in resurrecting the program after the interim Josh Eilert season. And so it's Ren Baker's third different men's basketball decision he's had to make.
Which isn't his fault. I mean, that's
not his fault. He could have chosen to, hire, granted it was a weird time after Huggins was dismissed, but he could have hired someone for a full-time position, though there weren't a lot of candidates, but it was like, okay, Josh Eilert's the interim. And then we get through that. Josh Eilert, forever interim coach of my heart, West Virginia.
He's still without a job, by the way. He's without a job currently.
Sad. That's why he's forever interim coach of my heart.
Yeah.
And so the DeVries thing was a home run, of course, until, he goes Benedict and cuts and runs. And so now here you are. And so if you're Baker, and to your point about the university putting out all those statements and everything, getting them at the ready. You can see that it's too much. The spin machine is whirling up to get people behind this. Like, hey, I trust him, so you should trust him. And to your point, Baker has earned the benefit of the doubt in how successful and how well he has done with these hires, better than any athletic director in my lifetime at WVU. And now, but at the same time, behind the 8 ball, because you're watching, as we've mentioned, Michigan multiple times, other programs go from 0 to hero in a matter of 12 months.
Well, I mean, they kind of did it. I mean, if they basically should have made the tournament. I mean, if they were a tournament team, it wouldn't even be a question. And they went from 9 to 19 wins.
10 win, 11 win, 12 win program last year.
No, they had 9. They had 9 wins.
9. Yeah.
They went from 9 to 19 wins. And I'm not that's literally the case.
Yeah. So
that's what I'm saying. So here's the biggest issue. Here's the biggest issue. If we were sitting there a year ago, 365 days ago, it seems almost like it was 10 years ago, but also seems like yesterday. If we were sitting there a year ago talking about the West Virginia search, I could argue all day about the 31 appearances and the Final Fours and Sweet 16 to Elite Eights, and now that they even have claimed a national title, and Jerry West and Huggins and Hot Rod Hudley and all of that, and so could Ren Baker. But I could see a prospective coach after the Eilert year. Huggins was still going to every game. He was still very much looming over. I could see a coach saying to Ren, the history is what it is. It's good. I'm glad you're respecting it now, but I'm concerned about the future. At the time, the NIL was not even, that was prior to McAfee flooding more, and he did not give as much at that time, if you want to be real. Like, it was, I could see a coach at that point saying, I just don't want to touch the WVU job. I could see that a year ago. Instead, they got the second best coach on the market. It looked like Ren Baker was a used car salesman out there. They're coming off the worst season in program history that I still argue is the worst, because they had 9 wins. I know the end of Catlett they had 8, but they lost more games with Eilert.
I was about to say, the only thing that comes close is the end of the Gil Catlett era. So, yeah.
No, I think the Eilert year was worse because they had more losses, even though they had one more win, and they also had drama the whole time. The end of Catlett, they weren't suing the NCAA.
And it was all the players had left, and they couldn't do that in the Catlett era. They were just regular bad in the Catlett era.
This was worse. So you're coming off the worst season. I could see a coach saying, no, I just don't want to touch this. Maybe in a couple years, I could see them swinging and missing in that search. But instead, they got the second best coach in the market. The only program that did better nationally was Michigan with Dusty May, who Ren and him are friends, but he said, that's a better job. I got to take that one. And Ren even admitted to that in the intro presser, that May told me that, and then I got DeVries. And George, DeVries had other options. Louisville wanted him. Other schools wanted him, and he chose West Virginia. You wonder now why, but he chose West Virginia. They did very well in that search. The confusion is you're coming off the worst season and had less money. These are factual points. And you did better than when you were doing a 10-win turnaround, a tournament snub, and have more money. How does that make any sense? That is the scenario that I think is legitimately confusing for fans. And again, I think it's going to be hard to sell a program building. You got to give time, when DeVries just proved, not at a blue blood, not at Michigan with money, at West Virginia, you can go from 9 to 19. He just did it. Like, I get at that point a year ago, there were fans saying, oh, it'll be a 5-year journey. I could get coaches even going on social media and saying the vibe here is bad. The fans who were saying it was a 5-year journey were disproved by DeVries. He just did it. He went from 9 to 19, and they should have been in the tournament. And he didn't have Tucker DeVries. If Tucker DeVries played like 2 more games, they would have been in the tournament, because then they clearly would have won at least one of those, and then they would have been in the tournament. So it was just proven to be possible. It is not impossible. It just happened. And then you end up with Ross Hodge. And again, there's a lot of pressure on him, and now pressure on DeVries, now pressure on Ren Baker. And here's the issue, George, that I think for Ren that maybe he's not equating. If Rich Rod doesn't have success, the fans, even the ones sold now, who are they going to turn on number one? Rich Rod, because they didn't like him from 17 years ago. They're going to say Ren and McAfee were fooled by Rich Rod.
Yeah,
they're going to give Ren and McAfee a pass for Rich Rod, because they're going to turn on not year 1, but year 2 or 3. If they're not even, they're not more than a bowl team, and they're not contending in the Big 12, they're going to turn on Rich Rod. If Ross Hodge doesn't have success, they're going to turn on Ren, not Ross Hodge, because I've also said this, and this is the defense of Ross Hodge, George. If Ren Baker called me and said, you want to coach the basketball team for $3 million, I'm taking the job, and I'm not qualified to coach a basketball team. It's not Ross Hodge's fault that he got offered the job. Of course he should take the damn job. It's an incredible job in general, let alone for him with 2 years at North Texas. It's not his fault he got the job and he wasn't ready. Ren should have been able to get somebody else, is what I'm saying.
We go from one ridiculous situation to another ridiculous situation. If you thought West Virginia had a hard time finding its next men's basketball coach, that may be the same situation at neighboring Maryland, which has had one of the most tumultuous weeks in recent memory, dating back.
Again, West Virginia can't get any players. They should fire Ross Hodge and call Kevin Willard right now. I mean, they'd just be like, we're sorry. We made a boo-boo.
No.
I mean,
He's not leaving Maryland to go to West Virginia. He's leaving Maryland to go to Villanova. That's
but I wasn't being serious. But I'm saying that I'm
Yeah.
not being serious.
Yeah.
West Virginia's obviously not firing Ross Hodge. They just hired him.
So the head basketball coach, Kevin Willard, has successfully swung the fan base in his favor in a matter of 6 days. Swung the fan base in his favor.
I don't think they should have been out. I mean, they were good a couple years ago too. I mean, like, what did they want out of him?
Outed his athletic director, who was planning to leave for a job, announcing it before he and the program were ready.
Yeah, at the NCAA tournament, not just a regular press conference. At the NCAA tournament, he's like, we're talking about an extension, but it's kind of hard to talk to somebody that's about to leave. He's going to be at SMU. Before they were ready, the national media was already reporting, but it was not announced. And that's just hilarious, right?
Getting Maryland to its first Sweet 16 off of the right hand of Derek Queen for the first time since 2016, to now being less candid in his most recent interactions with the media in San Francisco.
Yeah, he already got what he wanted now.
Like, he already got what he wanted, and apparently is prepared and ready to, going from yesterday on Team 980, Kevin Sheehan's show, to saying that as of now I'm staying, to today completely deflecting and talking about Florida instead of the situation when he started the situation a week ago.
Yeah. Well, you want to try to do it. You think West Virginia's in trouble with the portal coach and the NIT. You want to do a coaching search after the portal closed. You officially can't get anyone. It had closed. Like, you got to be dipping in and at least calling people now.
And you're out of candidates at the same time. Yeah, the portal thing is a whole.
Well, the portal's the bigger problem than even Canada. They can get a coach probably better than Ross Hodge, but the portal's closed. I mean, you can't. You gotta. There's windows in the portal.
I don't know if they can get a better coach. Maryland's playing
maybe not now, but
yeah, its biggest game in 9 years, in nearly a decade. 2016 was the last time they were in Sweet 16. Much like we talked about Indiana, Maryland's only had slightly more success. They are 2-13 all time in the Sweet 16 round. The only 2 times that they've won in the Sweet 16, they've also gone to the Final Four in back-to-back seasons in 01 and 02. And of course, the 02 team ended with that Juan Dixon and Steve Blake in that national title team led by Gary Williams. The program has no athletic director. It has a university president that was way too excited to announce that Kermit the Frog was going to be the commencement speaker for the spring commencement. Of course, legendary animator Jim Henson, Maryland alum, designed Kermit the Frog. So somehow Kermit the Frog will be speaking as the commencement speaker.
It's about time Kermit gets one. Yeah, it's about time for Kermit.
Yeah, it's an athletic department that is in turmoil and tumult, with a basketball team and its coach that have been away from College Park for 10 plus days now. They do not fly back home after the games in Seattle. They went straight to San Francisco. And here sits Maryland, who faces Florida, and if they get by that, Arkansas or Texas Tech. You got
something that should have really tipped off Maryland fans is what we talked about in the West Virginia segment, that it was kind of fake reporting, but I think is foreshadowing negativity for Maryland in particular. So everybody was talking about and this was not really going on, but can West Virginia try to steal Richard Pitino at the time away from Villanova? And there was conversation at that point, because maybe at that point is right around when Willard said he at the time was going to stay. So people were saying, okay, maybe Villanova has to pivot and maybe they're going to get Richard Pitino. Then Pitino goes to Xavier and West Virginia does the Ross Hodge thing. And the program that at the time looked like they had egg on their face even more than WVU was Villanova. But we both know that's obviously the best job of the bunch, and they don't have egg on their face. Clearly, it could easily be that Villanova is sitting there saying, we're just waiting for Kevin Willard to finish this damn NCAA tournament, and then he's going to come aboard, and we don't care about Richard Pitino, and then they're going to end up getting Kevin Willard, and then that leaves Maryland without a dance partner in this dance. And George, what Maryland should do is exactly what West Virginia and Ren Baker should have done. They should sit there and have this mentality. Okay, we're not a blue blood. We don't have the top dollar or the top NIL, but we also, we're on the rise now, and we have some history and have some things, and we're doing some better things now, and we just have proof in the pudding of being able to do this now with Kevin Willard. So we're not the top, but we're an attractive job for sure. It's also a hotbed basketball recruiting area in the DMV, 100%. And what we're going to do, okay, Villanova, you had a recent dynasty. If you're going to basically do this kind of weirdness and steal our coach, just like Indiana stole DeVries from West Virginia and a blue blood taking from West Virginia, then what Maryland should do is what West Virginia should do. West Virginia and Maryland are both historic programs with a lineage of success, even though they're not blue bloods in basketball. They should say, okay, you steal from me because you're here on the food chain. I'm here. So I'm now going to steal from somebody else. They shouldn't be trying to worry about coaches that are available in the stupid open market. They should call another school and say, we're not the ugliest in the dance, even if we're not the 10. So you see that we got screwed over by him. So now we're going to screw you over, and you're going to be sitting there in June with no coach. Ren Baker should have been saying all the positive things about the West Virginia job are there. So if we're sitting there and we're just looking at the open, this is where I think he did that was wrong. If you're just looking at the open market of these are the coaches that are available, the McCollums, the Medveds, now Ross Hodge, he's looking out, he's my friend. These are the coaches that want another job. They're at mid majors. Maybe we could, they're available on the market. They're getting talked about. You could get more progressive than that and say, no, you have a coach that is established at school X that is winning there, but I believe we are a better program than that school if we get the right guy, and maybe we have more money now because we have this $6 million coming in from Indiana and whatever money Maryland has. So we're going to steal your coach, and we're going to put you in the drama that we were in 2 years ago. I apologize for the era that we're in, but that is how we keep up with the Joneses here. Maryland needs to do that and screw somebody else over. West Virginia did not want to do that clearly, or we're in bed with Ross Hodge the whole time. But that's what Maryland has to do. If he leaves and goes to Villanova or wherever, they need to then screw another program over, take their coach that is established, that program then screw somebody below them, and around and round we go. That is the world we're living in. Don't be afraid to do that.
It's an eerie similarity in that Evans, before he left, 3 days before he leaves, extends Willard an offer sheet for an extension, and Willard, doesn't accept it. Evans leaves. It has been reported, and shout out to Jeff Ehrman, Inside Maryland Sports, who's been, he's most plugged in person on the Maryland beat and has been on top of all this, that Willard has received everything that he's asked for, both publicly and privately, in this press conference. More revenue sharing money when it comes down the pike, a little bit more.
He alluded to a little bit of that in the presser too.
The athletic department, which is operating under Deputy Athletic Director Colleen Sorum, as well as a few other people, that's apparently been offered to him. He has not signed it, and so he is a New York guy, Long Island guy. His played at Pitt, which is kind of like the funny weird twist in there. His dad was head coach at Pitt,
but only 1 year, I believe, though. But he did play there. Yeah.
Correct. Dad was coach, point guard, played at Pitt. Rick Pitino disciple, New York, New Jersey, Long Island. Lou Carnesecco, old school Big East guy, loves the freaking Big East. Villanova, it's not like Maryland's that far from his home. It's a train, his family's down here, but it's a train ride back to Long Island.
They're not the Big East type school, though, but yeah.
Yes. Maryland has played in these,
it's still close.
Invitational games in Madison Square Garden, at Barclays Center in Brooklyn, at Prudential Center in Newark. The Terps have a large alumni base there. So, like, all that connection fits. It's not like he's leaving from Kansas, to go.
Well, also, I mean, when you're in the DMV, and even when you have the Baltimore airport and all those, I mean, he has easy connections to go wherever he wants. He has train rides. It's not like, say, for example, if you're in Pittsburgh where you got to drive for a while to get to one of these other cities. You don't have as much. He has easy access to wherever he wants to go, where he is, but I guess he'd have more of it at Villanova.
Well, and much like a Darren DeVries, it's slightly different because DeVries is going to Indiana, major public state university. Villanova, predominantly basketball school. Yeah, they've got a D2 football program.
That's
I don't.
attractive to a coach, I would think. It's all
I
about
think
them.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think Maryland could match them on resources, but Villanova can plow more of it when the revenue sharing comes into basketball, obviously. But he's so
Right.
enamored with the Big East and with basketball that he believes is a good move for him. What is dickish about the whole thing, like DeVries, is that he's strung the program, the university, and the fan base along that, listen, we've got some changes. I'd like to see these things happen, and laid them out there. The university, as far as I understand, has been willing in this limited period of negotiating time where they've not been to College Park, not been in College Park since last Tuesday maybe. And the university has been willing to provide much, if not all, these things that he's asked for, while vowing to continue to work with him. And it still appears that it's going to be Villanova at the end of the day. And
well, here's my question: if I was him, though, why did it take? Just literally a question: why did it take so long for Maryland to agree to these things? Because I understand that the fans weren't sold on him as a great coach until recently, but I think that's crazy because he was resurrecting a program that was down. He did take him to the tournament initially. He did beat West Virginia when West Virginia was in with Huggins, even though it wasn't a deep run. It's still a tournament victory. So he did have that instant success right away. You shouldn't have to require winning a national title when you've only done it one time and you don't have that many deep runs. I mean, the argue in terms of history of WU versus Maryland is, Maryland has a more legit title where West Virginia kind of claims a stupid one from a million years ago, but West Virginia has done more seasons that are quote unquote special than Maryland has, even if they have that better one. And he did this success that hadn't been done since 2016. Now, why does it take this man to have to go in a press conference to get a national viral clip to go crazy for things to be agreed upon? It should have been agreed upon arguably a year ago. And I remember we were golfing 2 years ago, which already Willard was on the job, and you were saying that you believed that Maryland's NIL was one of the worst in the Big Ten. And from what I was telling about West Virginia, you were like, their money is not good, but if they keep doing that, they'll have a better NIL than Maryland, because the mentality of Maryland's NIL was the problem, where they wanted to give internships rather than just giving the money because the players want to take the money. So what I'm saying is, you have a coach who's in his 40s, not in his 60s, who probably this first day he got on the job was like, this NIL strategy is stupid. Why are we doing this? Then he got in the tournament and won a game. Right then in 2023, they should have said, you're right. Here's everything you want. We're going to do this in the future. And then now they might be able to go ahead and win a national title rather than worrying about a Sweet 16 or Elite 8, because they'd be 2 years ahead of where they are now, mentally speaking. I could argue it's too little too late if I'm him.
Yes. Slightly changed from last season to this season. So year one, as you mentioned, puts together a roster on the fly, draws Jameer Young back home, draws Don Carey back home, puts together a tremendous run. They win 16 out of 17 home games. The only game they lost was to a ranked UCLA team. Go to the tournament, beat West Virginia, lose to number one seed Alabama. The next season, he stocks the roster too heavily laden with freshmen, and it shows. And they have their worst season since the early 90s, after the Len Bias probation era type of thing. That's how bad it was, losing season. This year,
but like, I mean, are you really out on a guy off one bad year?
No. And so it's like, okay, I commend the guy. I personally happen to, has no bearing here nor there. I like the guy because he says what he thinks. He's good. He's very New York. Some people don't like dealing with New York people. I like New York people because they're going to tell it to you straight, but also at the same time, there's always an angle. There's always an end game. There's always an angle.
But not only do I like that too, as you know, that is what pisses me the most off of the West Virginia search. It's not who you hire. I think we were lied to and we were tried to be fooled. That's the problem. I am right there at the pressers. I have locked in a front row seat. I'm in that top group right there, and you're looking right at me and selling me a bill of goods. That's my problem. No, and Calvin Willard does not do that. So I do appreciate that. That was why that was my favorite press conference of the year, because it was just, here's what I want. Here's the truth. I literally have a picture of me being friends with the AD 10 minutes ago, and now I'm going to throw him under the bus. I mean, if I was the AD, I would have literally punched him square in the jaw, and had that go viral. But he doesn't care. That's I like that. Yeah.
And so Willard has said since the beginning of the season that he admitted, and I'm paraphrasing, that the NIL situation approved because the opening of the season press conference talking about we now, again, I'm paraphrasing, but the quotes are there. We now have the resources, we have the money available to go and get some of these guys, which included landing Derek Queen, who was one of the top 5 prospects in the country. Of course, played at Mount Verde with Cooper Flagg, and is obviously lived up to the billing from game one.
But that also means that it's not just you reporting. That means that prior to that, they did not, is what he's saying.
Yes. Prior to that, they're saying it was funded at an X, without giving specific numbers, it was funded at an X level. And he told us that because of the money situation, we were able to get Derek Queen, we were able to get Jacoby Gillespie, who transferred in, we were able to get Selton Miguel, who transferred in, etc. And so, now he's asking for a little bit more because he sees what he's been able to do. And this roster with the slow to, Crab 5 and everything's taken off in a month and a half. January, we've got these same people, the fan base people that you're talking about, that thinks, hey, this guy's, sucks as a coach, because they go out to Washington, who finished as the worst team in the Big Ten, and they lose there on January 2nd. And then 3 or 4 days later, they go to Eugene and they lose at Oregon, who at the time was ranked in the top 10. So it go out and he couldn't win on the road. Then suddenly in the middle of January, snap, they figure it out and they go to Illinois and they win on the road, and they start
getting ranked and right.
They finish the season 5-1 on the road in the Big Ten, and the one was a loss in the final 7 seconds in overtime at Ohio State. So they figured some things out. He's not the best X's and O's guy, but he's willing to adapt his style, as I believe he's done in each of these 3 seasons. Each of these teams has looked different. 2 of them have made the tournament. And you've got, to your original point when you asked the question, why didn't it happen earlier? That's where, and Terps fans are going to be real pissed at Kevin Willard if, and I believe when this happens now, you can draw most of the ire at Damon Evans, because Damon Evans had built this program in the 8+ years that he was there around football. And I can understand
get enough success there, though.
I can understand that there's a certain value to that in the way the Big Ten, in terms of the television contracts the Big Ten has, $1 billion+ with
realignment's all about football too.
Yeah.
So, you got to be attractive in football.
As you and I know, Mike, that's the case at most major universities, but give or take the university, then we've got a little bit of a distribution split where, hey, if you're a little more successful in basketball, some of it goes over here in basketball. So Evans and Mike Loxley, the head football coach, extremely close, and
who also should be fired, by the way.
And so now you've got Loxley, who this was going to be a pivotal season to begin with, because they, 3 straight years, 3 straight bowl wins, bad year last year. And now you've recruited, again, one of the top players in the country, Malik Washington, to stay home at Maryland, like Derek Queen stayed home. And you've got all these kids staying at Maryland, and now it's up to you to make them work. But you've got
if you get the area, then you should be okay. At least the area is good. Right.
But then it comes down to winning these games. And football's had the same problem. And if and when it happens, I'll be the first to write the story saying they finally did it. I don't like using blue bloods as much as you do. They can't beat the blue bloods in the Big Ten. They can't beat Michigan. They can't beat Ohio. They get close here and there. Can't beat Michigan. Can't beat Ohio State.
Yeah, but the problem isn't even just not beating the blue bloods. What is the signature win, even if it's not a blue blood?
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't have to be a blue blood. I'm just in general. I know they had the bowl wins. I'm talking about in the regular season outside of the bowl games, because you could argue all day, and you said they intentionally made the schedule so weak so that minimum will get in the bowl game. But the problem with doing that is if you don't win any conference games, your out of conference schedule is trash. Yes. So they have no win to hang their hat on, and the resume easily could be picked apart and be said that, yeah, you're getting 6-7 wins a year because you play nobody to open up the year. You have 3 wins that anybody could win. So then you putter away the rest of the season.
And to your point, I can't even give you the regular season one because they're all kind of equal because they haven't beaten those teams I've mentioned. And
that's the problem. That was the Neil Brown problem. There was no big signature win. And if you got one, it was then picked apart.
The bowl game in New York against Virginia Tech.
Well, I said not a bowl game.
And the same thing. And so Neil Brown, not to go into a side. Neil Brown, same thing, where it's for Neil Brown, it's the 2 Virginia Tech wins and the Mayo Bowl win over Carolina. Like, that's it, right?
Well, he beat a ranked Kansas State team early it's early in the tenure. He had the wins early in the tenure, and
Sure.
then he beat Army in the bowl game, like early in the tenure. But that's exactly my point, and this is exactly why I pick on Loxley. I cover the guy that was the most made fun of nationally. He went viral. I was responsible for 2 of the 3 times. He went viral repeatedly. And George, I know that actually Loxley has the head-to-head win. You could argue Neil Brown's career resume is better.
Oh, sure,
You
sure,
could
sure.
even
Yeah.
argue his WU resume is better.
Yeah.
And
Back,
he's fired,
yes,
and
yes.
Loxley's still there.
Yeah, back to our original point, because we've done the Loxley discussion before. So
I just hate that he is still there.
The original point being that, you know, the allegiance side with basketball, and that's a construct that Damon Evans built,
Right?
that I believe, and there's a weird divide among people, you know, the fan base and on social media, and it's like, oh, we got to give Locks everything in football, and it's like, regardless if Mike Loxley was, you know, Bo Schembechler, or Nick Saban, as a Nick Saban disciple that he is, even if he was all that, it's still much harder to win it in football than it is in basketball.
Well,
basketball, sure. I've got to win.
I can't believe the fans aren't mad at him and don't want him fired. That's what I don't get.
Basketball, I got to win 6 games in March. And I don't even have to be that good to win the 6 games in March, because we've seen crazy shit happen.
Yeah, San Diego State wasn't that good.
I got to be one of the 68, and then I got to win, and then I got to go on a heater, and I got to win 6 games or 4 games, and I'm in a Final Four, and 6, and I win a national championship. It is easier to do than basketball, as we've said. Maryland traditionally, and it goes even before Gary Williams, to what Lefty Driesell did and winning ACC titles. And then the program, a huge setback with Len Bias and the cocaine scandal and everything like that. And Gary Williams comes in and slowly builds and resurrects the program and hangs the hat in 2002 and wins the only national title. So it's not a perennial Duke or Carolina type of thing, but it's a place that can be consistently good and punch above its weight in basketball. And for whatever reason, Evans, mainly because of how close he was with Loxley, and at the time when Evans came in, men's basketball coach Mark Turgeon predated him. Turgeon is now gone. And the focus has just been, let's build up football and let's get football to where we're respectable.
And really, when was the last time that football was a national contender?
2002, Ralph, 01, 02, Ralph Region, ACC.
And then how often in the last 40 years? Like 3 times, maybe.
Yeah. Phrygian. Under
but not even the whole tenure, though. Not the whole tenure. Yes, Phrygian, but not like literally every year.
Correct. But most of the Phrygian era that capitalized in the late 00s and the 01s. So
that's my point. There's been more of that in basketball.
Yes. And so the program has the university has this history, you know, with athletics, where it kind of reminds me of Stanford a little bit, where they're athletic. Sometimes athletics can seem like an afterthought at Maryland. It should not, but in recent years, sometimes, and it's, I don't mean to disrespect the Olympic sports, because they under Damon Evans, they won lacrosse national titles, they won a soccer national title. They're good. The Olympic sports have traditionally been strong at Maryland. Baseball's been good recently, but the 2 to 3 that stir the drink are men's and women's basketball, of course, and football. Brenda Fries said Damon Evans was always supportive. Brenda Fries, the women's coach. The Terps women are in the Sweet 16. First time the women and the men have been in the Sweet 16 at the same time, which is kind of wild, because the women are pretty much there, 9 out of 10 years in a given decade since Brenda has been the coach there. She's got a national title to her name. But you've got to provide. I don't mean to sound like a homer here, but like whatever basketball is asking for, I think you've got to favor it a little bit, because football is going to do what football is going to do. And until you can prove to me that football can beat these upper echelon teams, I'm not saying they got to go win the Big Ten, even though
I just think it's chicken or the egg.
But football has not shown, even with the most prolific quarterback statistically in the history of the university,
that was the problem.
It can win these games. How are you going to tell me now that freshman touted recruit guy is going to do it? And who knows, even if he, and I don't say this out loud often, but like they bring in these talented recruiting classes and they're top 25 and they get all this off. They win the off season with this momentum and keeping some of these guys at home. And half of these guys are going to transfer. Like, I just know it. Like, I don't put too much stock in, oh man, Maryland's going to be good in 2027, because I know these guys are going to transfer. Jay Sean Barham transferred to Michigan. Corey Dyches,
Yeah,
CJ
100%.
Dupre, all tight ends, transfer.
That happens everywhere. But yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So I can't put stock on them being a 4-year, we're going to build this thing. It's just like you got a couple window shot to here. And if they didn't do a Talia Tungavailoa and him, putting up the 400 yards a game and 3 touchdowns that he did, I don't know how they're going to do it in football, which goes back to Damon Evans aligned with him. It is very fascinating to see if and when and who Maryland selects as an athletic director, which is going to be something that will presumably led by a committee that would include the university president, Daryl Pines. But if you got to do that first and then find the basketball coach, they're behind the 8 ball and screwed for, I don't want to say 2 seasons, but you're looking at a bad issue here if it's going to be April and you've got no athletic, if they lose in here in the Elite 8 or the Sweet 16, that you've got no athletic director and no men's basketball coach, and the portal's going to close and all the other jobs are filled. What are you going to do?
Yeah, I mean, and there is the conspiracy theory that I'll bring up that others don't necessarily want to bring up, but I've even heard brought up to me that maybe Evans was favoring Loxley because he wanted to see an African-American have success. He wanted to see that historic situation occur. We just saw the first time an African-American leads a team to a national championship game, and that being at Notre Dame and not Maryland, obviously. He wanted maybe that more in his heart because of what it maybe would mean for the culture overall and for him personally, rather than a Kevin Willard who is, a very outspoken New Yorker who's white. Like maybe that didn't get him the bump in that regard. The only thing I can give as a counter argument in the defense of anybody who says you put more into football in this era, Maryland's in obviously a great conference, but we're going to musical chair it again multiple times. We're going to get in a 2-conference super conference at some point, probably within the next decade. And I don't think like overall being left out in general, West Virginia or Maryland will be left out because you're probably gonna have 30 or 40 teams in these conferences. But if you want to make sure that you're stable and in a great position and you're confident in all that, the sport that you would rather be good in versus even being great in basketball is football. Being good in football is better for conference realignment and TV contracts and all of that than even being great in basketball. So there's a scenario, George, where they could win a national championship in basketball, but if Mike Loxley has 5 wins or 6 wins or barely can get bowl games and they refuse to fire this man, the conference, and when they do the super conference, they're going to sit there and say, no. Like that is the problem, which maybe is what he was thinking outside of the other race comment. Maybe it's just purely about conference realignment. Football's more visible. It makes more money right away. TV contracts are better. All of that.
Yeah, 12 games a year.
I can make an argument for West Virginia that as much as I think the football program, and they've even said maybe get disrespected historically, and there is success there, 15th winningest, 15 conference titles, you could do more than what Brown did. I think they can have more success. Look at the Rich Rod era, all of that. However, the history is even better that's not disputed on the basketball side. They do have a long history. They had the freaking NBA logo, was a former West Virginia Mountaineer. That history is even better and does usually get respected. And they have claimed a national title there that they refuse to do in football. They are doing more in basketball in that regard. And it is even a more historic program if we're talking program to program. You could argue that if you flood, if you could argue, George, the same thing you're saying about Maryland. You could argue that Pat McAfee, instead of worrying about a football national title that he wants redemption for, if he would get to his brain and say, all I have to do is get the people a national championship, it doesn't matter the sport. Maybe we are better served, me and Kendrick and people, to flood basketball. And then clearly they can go from 9 to 19 in 1 year. You can get star players there. You can do things there. And then all of a sudden you go on a heater and you get out a great conference and you maybe get in and you're playing quad games and you're beating quad 1 teams. And then you go on and you get to a Final Four and that's going to be cherished forever, just like 2010 was and 1959 was. And you do that, maybe that's easier to do than to win a Big 12, get in the playoff. Now you got to win several games. I mean, you can make an argument that it was easier to win a national title decades ago than it would be now, even though it's more fair now because you got to win playoff games. Like you could get in, win a conference, and then get upset like Oregon was, and they still don't have a national championship. So you could argue that even West Virginia should just say, F it. We're just crashing the funding to basketball, trying for basketball 1 year, and then, football, do what you can, but they're not going to do that because they know that the better thing for the program is for football to have success, even if you don't go to the elite level of success. But George, the year that Huggins had his scandals, multiple, and then had his career ended, George, this was out there factually. National media reported this. West Virginia on just the basketball version of the NIL, just what they wanted to do for basketball, just for Huggins roster, they funded $1.5 million in 1 month at a poor state.
Was that $1 Million May? Is that what?
That was the $1 Million May.
Yeah.
Before the scandals. So what I'm saying is that was literally that mentality of what I'm saying, that Kendrick and that people went like, shit, we're just going to fund the hell out of this. And Huggins was going to have a great roster. They had, if you recall, they had the number 2 transfer class in the country before his scandals that never played together. They were doing what I'm saying and what you're saying. They were doing this plan of, we're going to just give it all to basketball and go for it one more time for Huggins. And if people want to say in 20 years we bought a ring, go ahead. Like that's what their mentality was. And then Huggins screwed it up. But that could happen again. If you can do it once, why can't you do it again? That's what I'm saying that maybe both schools should do. But they're not, because they want to prioritize football because of realignment. I mean, Ren Baker's even admitted it. We need to be in that. We need to make sure football is clicking more.
And I'll leave it with another critique of Evans, who led, a pretty sweeping expansion of facilities at Maryland. But in doing so, Maryland completed a lot of this facility stuff at a time when we've gravitated away from how great is your facility to what can you provide for me monetarily.
100%.
And I, of course, compare it to West Virginia for obvious reasons. We're both alumni, and I follow the program, even though I don't cover it like you do. And I see the initiatives they're doing, and I'm like, they don't do that in Maryland. They don't. Just this past year football season, Maryland introduced Testudo Lager with a partnership with a local beer company.
WVU did that 3 years ago.
100%. 3 years ago, people have been buying Trust Lager. I've been buying Trust Lager at football games for 3+ years, and now they got liquor.
And the GOAT, I think, is there's not that many of them. The GOAT is an incredibly smart business plan. 100%.
Maryland's other issue with its NIL and that people complained about, and that it's too bifurcated. There's what WVU, it's Country Roads Trust. That's it. There's your banner.
Well, in most schools, there's just one collective. Yeah, I mean,
you've got Terrapin Club, which is kind of like the main booster, old school boostery organization.
That's like the Mountaineer Athletic Club. That still exists.
Yes, courtside, like Mountaineer Athletic Club, courtside seats. Then you've got one Maryland NIL. Then there's a Turtle NIL. That it's just too the approach is scattershot all over the board, and it's not cohesive, and it doesn't make any sense. It's got to be reorganized. It's got to be better streamlined. That it's be like, hey, these are our programs, and this is the NIL where you donate it to. And they've been behind the 8 ball on it. I put that solely at the feet of Evans, who also was just selected to be on the college football playoff selection committee. So he'll get to do that at SMU now. So for as much as those platitudes and stuff about being an administrator that he's earned, he's missed the boat on the modern portion of what college athletics administration looks like now, in my opinion. They went and did the facilities thing. Great. They turned Cole Fieldhouse, which was the old basketball arena that started being renovated when I was a grad student in 2016-17. And it's this beautiful football practice facility now, indoor facility they didn't have before, 2 outdoor fields, all that. Basketball last season, two seasons ago, broke ground on a practice facility next to the Xfinity Center. Maryland was one of 3 programs in a power conference in major college basketball that did not have a standalone basketball practice facility.
But see, this is also what pisses me off about Ross Hodge, because West Virginia has all of that. And it's very, very nice, and they've had it for years. So why? That's what I'm saying. There's a lot more that could be sold. That I don't. Yeah.
And
that's
so
what I'm saying.
Needed the practice facility. It's not a critique of that, but you've asked donors to fund all this stuff. The Gossett family, which funded a lot of the renovations at the football complex and the football team house, also funding the lion's share of this basketball practice facility. And when you do that, then now, okay, you've exhausted those things, and you can only go to Kevin Plank, who's the founder of Under Armour, so many times to do stuff. And now here we are at basketball, and you need money to actually pay the guys to stay, and money to give the coach to be able to allocate to keep players. And now here we are, and you're going to have this beautiful building that's going to open, I believe, next year, 26, and you don't know who's going to be using it to coach in it yet. So,
and you know, the saddest part is, and I do agree, Kevin Willard had a great press conference. He won out in his little war with Evans in that regard. There's a possibility that Evans is the man laughing last. Not only is he on the committee, George, SMU is a money pit. He's going to a good situation. So it's not like he's going to go take some L's. He's good. He's good. Now they had their situation for 30 plus years, but the ACC is down and they got some money there. And a lot of other ACC programs do not. Yeah. Pitt, for example, is really down and out financially. You want to talk about coaches? They can't afford to fire Jeff Capel. They're trying to fund an Olympic thing called Victory Heights, which is how their athletic director ended up getting ousted. And they're George, I know this for a fact from people that cover them. They're telling donors when they call the McAfee equivalent, like Louis Riddick or whoever is their top person, who's like the Ken Kendrick, when they call them, the first thing they ask is, can you fund to Victory Heights? They literally talk about football and basketball after that, because why? They broke ground on Victory Heights and thought donors were going to fund Olympic sports above football, which is stupid. So that's the ACC. And yeah, there are top dogs of the Clemson and Miamis, if the conference in Florida State, if they stay around, eventually those schools will always get good. But there's a real opportunity there in that conference that is not that deep, and the money that is in Dallas and is there, and those donors have been wanting to donate for 40 years, but had the sanctions come down, they could flood it. They were just in the playoff. Like, that is a great job to be an administrator at right now, and you could argue it is a better one than Maryland, which is what he left. So he arguably took a better job despite the situation.
He's got the money. I think the SMU folks will find out that he's not the best in terms of actually.
Well, they may not like him, but he's in a good
athletics. But he's
yeah. And of course, outside of football, basketball wise, and the other sports, SMU is behind. But if you want to win a football national championship, you could certainly argue that SMU is ahead of Maryland, West Virginia.
Better chance to do it at SMU. Yes. I mean, and just in that league, with how weak that league is.
But it's already been proven that winning in that league for SMU is not a blue blood, and the NCAA hates them, and yet they can get in the playoff. So they've already been proven to get in off of just that schedule. So basically, if they mirror last season again, they should get in again. So yeah, I think that's a solid situation, but it'll be, I mean, the entire reason why West Virginia had to stay on Eilert after the Huggins scandal is because of the timing of when you get into May and June, the portal's closed. You can't fix the roster. All the coaches, literally Wren would say, they told him, if we leave our school now, we'll ruin our career. We'll ruin the school. We can't do it. Literally, he said, like, there were coaches who told him, your job's better. If I leave this school now, they might as well close up shop. I can't do it. The timing is so bad. So if Maryland is looking for a coach in May and in June, it's almost a 0% chance of success the next season. Yes. It's almost a 0%. Yeah. I don't care what whoever they hire, maybe the next year, but you're almost in a mulligan season, which is what West Virginia had with Eilert.
And one of your targets, Tony Skinn, who was an assistant under Willard in Willard's first season, he's a local guy, went back to his alma mater, George Mason. He was part of that Final Four team, and he's won 20-plus games in both of his seasons there, and this year won 27 games. They were in the A-10 championship. If they would have won, they would have. You could argue in a different year that they should have been in the tournament, even if they didn't win the A-10. But 27 wins, and George Mason ties the most in the program's history, going back to that Final Four run in the late 2000s when Jim Larranaga was the coach. So, but he just reportedly renegotiated his contract, presumably for a higher buyout and everything like that. So if Maryland wants him, it's going to cost more money now if indeed Kevin Willard does leave. And now here we are.
Yeah, you can still go pluck a coach, though. That's what I'm saying. They need to stop worrying about who's available. Just go pluck somebody. I mean, they're going to have to pluck someone. I mean, I'd still be unlikely to be good.
They got to hire the athletic director first, and the president's got to be a little more assertive in in how they go about these things. Football, sports sometimes don't seem
I
like
mean,
they're
they
the first
almost might be
priority.
forced to just. I mean, there were people that wanted Chester Frazier to get the job, and he didn't. And by the way, George, here's two things: Maryland might either be forced to just promote an assistant and have a kind of an Eiler year, even if not in name, even if they're not going to be good and fans will freak out. Or the other thing, what should happen, and I actually just thought of it now, maybe they should hire Chester Frazier. He is one of the best recruiters in the country. He was just passed over at West Virginia. He's already won a conference title in the Big Ten at Illinois. He got a lot of credit for doing so. He's not been a head coach, so maybe the job's too big for him. And if Wren didn't want him, maybe why should you? But there are a lot of West Virginia fans that wanted Chester Frazier even more than Ross Hodge, and he is sitting there. And there are some that believe maybe he's going to be kept on staff. I find that very hard to believe. Find it very hard to believe. So I don't think that would be a bad hire for what he would do recruiting wise. I could see the fan base wouldn't like it, but I think he would win there. And it would be a big job for him right away.
Yeah.
But if you don't have any options and you're in June, Chester Frazier is going to be a head coach soon. And if you're telling me that your options are promoting an assistant, going to try to pay a George Mason buyout that's too high, or you get Chester Frazier for cheap, I think I would rather Frazier. I think Chester Frazier, look into Chester Frazier. He's one of the best recruiters in the country. I think Chester Frazier would be a good hire if you are put in that spot. And there are a lot of West Virginia fans that wanted Chester Frazier.
Got a long.
But I mean, I guess how great of a recruiter you can
here.
be if the portal's not open, though. You got to do illegal stuff at that point. But Chester Frazier is definitely who.
Yes.
But you also don't want to be afraid of success. It's still better to have success and then lose a guy than to not have success. I mean, there are literally West Virginia fans, the ones that are happy about Ross Hodge are like, well, at least he's not going to leave. It's better to have success and have a guy leave than to, what is the other alternative? To lose. Like, you don't want to just be like, I'm going to lose, so then the coach doesn't leave me. You want to have success. Don't be afraid of success is also the theme here. Like, you'd rather have success and then be left than to not have success at all. I don't get that thinking. Oh, he won't leave me. Well, that's because no one else wants him. How is that good? I don't understand that. But sure.
That will put a ridiculous bow on this edition of the Howitzer and Buzzsaw Show. A reminder that you can find us wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple, Google, wherever, Podbean. Search Howitzer, search Buzzsaw, Howitzer Buzzsaw to find us in your favorite podcast app. Also, a shout out to the Hyphen Podcast Group on socials and online. Morgantown-based podcast collective that we are a part of. Great podcast for the people. And check out the music that you hear right here on the HBS each and every time, courtesy of Kellen B. Conley, Nation, universe.com.
You can, of course, find us on social at Mike Osti 11, at Gerber3, at Howitzer Buzzsaw for the show handle. Find us everywhere you eat your podcasts. If you can't find us, you're just not trying hard enough. And also a quick shout out, because we did throw this up there live, especially if you're listening to this in podcast form. Of course, we're ahead of the tournament, so much of what you're listening to maybe has already occurred, but a big shout out for a couple hundred that have stuck with us here in the live the whole way through. So I'm not sure why, because this was mostly just done live, but really for the archive purposes. But I'm appreciating them nonetheless, and the madness is not going to stop. Yes, even when you think the madness is going to stop, the madness will keep on churning.
I feel like I haven't stopped since football season, honestly.
I mean, I've literally done a coaching search every year.
I'm trying to get ready for golf season. I got golf to cover golf this year.
Well, I don't know how you're gonna get that. I mean, if Maryland has no AD and no coach, or I mean, it'd be pretty hard to be Maryland beat and be like, I'm gonna not cover this.
I went from looking. I know that. I went from looking to flights to San Francisco at the beginning of the week, which were not feasible, to looking at flights for San Antonio. Should I have to prepare for that? To now just maybe needing to be ready for press conferences in College Park. That's how we've changed. That's how things have changed in a matter of 48 to 72 hours. So
I mean, if anyone needs any tips there on how to cover a coaching search, definitely have done a few. And Ren Baker also can give you a good lineage here. I mean, literally the one that I walked, the last press conference for Ren Baker, the literal first words from the person running it, who not Ren, but the person running it with the athletic program, was to myself and a few others, "You know how this works." And then it's like, yes, like we've been through the coaching search press conference so many times. Like,
Was it for Gail? Can you say if it was for Gail?
Yeah, it was definitely for Gail that said that. Yeah, that you know how this works. And there's always people. And by the way, those press conferences, I don't even get this, but some of those press conferences and a couple of the Rod press conferences, you get a couple TV stations in DC that come to those because they think like it's like a thing. But
shout out Eastern Panhandle folks. Shout out to everybody in Martinsburg.
It's the one I forget the WTEP or something like that. They're something like that. Maybe those aren't the letters, but they're at every one of them, and they're definitely from that area.
Parkersburg got a one-off station, and then DVM is a DC News Now station, but they also have office newsroom in Hagerstown, so they cover the Eastern Panhandle and that 4-state region out there.
Yeah, they sat there and got lied to as well. It was
shout out Eastern Panhandle, Berkeley Springs.
But yeah, I mean, you know how this works. So if you need now, I'm doing both the AD and the coach is almost a non-starter. That's almost impossible. I mean, there's no way to have success there. They're just not going to be good. I mean, there's no way that can work because I mean, anything that I would ask as a coach coming in, you wouldn't be able to answer, and I'm not even sure who would be searching. I mean, Ren Baker should be called to advise because he literally didn't have. You want to know the conspiracy? This will be the last comment I'll make on it.
Yes.
He literally did not hire a search firm for this coaching search. The first time in West Virginia history they did not have one since they existed.
He
did not hire one. There was no search. He did not have one because he didn't need one and had the guy the whole time. There's every other search had a search firm. He had a search firm that hired him.
Mm-hmm.
There's no. I mean, I would turnkey. If you see turnkey, if Maryland hires turnkey, I've experienced turnkey quite a bit. Ren Baker did not hire turnkey. The turnkey is generally the coaching search firm. Yeah. They did not hire one. That's weird as well. But I don't know if you're going to hire two search firms for two different searches simultaneously. You know, Maryland doesn't get as much national press here. I feel like they're going to get on there. They're going to get on some national attention here, negatively speaking, probably. But yeah, you got to pluck somebody.
This has been another edition of the Howitzer and Buzzsaw Show, where we conquer brackets, carousels, and sports radio.
One day, and my bracket is currently 99.5 right now. Brush my shoulders off as we conquer one day at a time.